Chapter 888. Number 16 Qingming Alley Yuzhou. 2 years ago, for the huge Yuzhou, this was a completely dispensable place. For the past 2 years, this place had always been an extremely awkward place. Today, 2 years later, this place had almost been completely forgotten by people. Number 16 Qingming Alley was not a small place. It was a courtyard house. Although it was a little old, the environment was still passable. In Yuzhou, where the pace of life was so fast that it made people dizzy, this area could be considered a leisurely place. A leisurely area. A group of people who didn't want to wait for death. Therefore, the atmosphere in the courtyard house had always been very strange. The falling snow dyed the courtyard and walls of the courtyard house white. There was a reclining chair in front of the entrance hall of the courtyard house. Lu Qing was lying on the reclining chair, watching the snowflakes slowly fall on his body. His eyes were numb, like a salted fish without a dream. There were people busy in every room of the courtyard house, searching for information, comparing files, analyzing intelligence. It seemed to be a very busy scene. But in fact, everyone was a little absent-minded. A middle-aged man next to Lu Qing was squatting and smoking. The tobacco fell on the snow with the hot air from his mouth. The middle-aged man shook his head with a depressed expression. What are we now? Lu Qing looked at the snowflakes and suddenly laughed at himself. The words of the middle-aged man, who looked extremely depressed, were even more depressing. The task force? Yes, the task force. Lu Qing nodded and smiled a little strangely. A high position and a great responsibility. The task force sounds quite scary, but what can we investigate? The information in our hands has been turned over. Apart from the information, we have nothing else. The key is that our case has made no progress, but the person involved in the case has already swaggered to Yuzhou. What's the point of our so-called task force? Investigation. The middle-aged man said gloomily. His tone was so honest that it made people cry. Lu Qing seemed to be used to the other party's temper. He shook his head and suddenly said, I want to leave this place, leave this damn place. In the eyes of Yuzhou, our so-called task force is a joke. We have always been a joke. The middle-aged man sighed and finished a cigarette before lighting another. Lu Qing didn't say anything. It seemed that he had nothing to say to the people around him. The task force had been established for 2 years. He was the third team leader of the task force. After 3 consecutive personnel changes, the task force, which had caused a sensation due to its high standards, had become more and more inconspicuous. The first leader of the task force was Yi Dongsheng, councilman rank. The second team leader was Fan Tianin, the minister of the Ministry of Security of Zhengzhou State. The rank of a governor. Lu Qing was the third team leader. Before becoming the team leader, he was the Secretary General of the Military Secretary Office, Deputy Governor level. This position could be said to be a direct descendant of the Special Warfare Group. This was also the result of the Prince Group and the Special Warfare Group's struggle to control the leadership of the task force. And there was only one thing they wanted to investigate. That was to investigate whether Qi Mulin's family, which had been wiped out by Li Tianlan, had committed treason and whether they had colluded with the Burning Legion. After Lu Qing became the leader of the task force, his only job was to prove that Qi Mulin had nothing to do with the Burning Legion. As long as he could prove this, then Li Tianlan's annihilation of the Qi family at that time would be a felony. Regardless of what would happen to Li Tianlan, at least he would have to stay in the desert prison for a few more years. No one could find any evidence of Qi Mulin colluding with the Burning Legion, but no one could find evidence to prove Qi Mulin's innocence. This so-called task force had no direction of investigation at the beginning. Moreover, neither Yi Dongsheng nor Fan Tianin paid much attention to this matter. This matter dragged on for almost 2 years. By the time Lu Qing came over, even if there was any previous evidence, it had been erased without a trace. This position was like a quagmire. Lu Qing was trapped in it on the first day he took office. There was no progress in the whole case since he became the team leader. Lu Qing often felt that he was a joke, and the task force was also a joke. They carried out the so-called investigation every day. Day after day, Lu Qing didn't even know whether the task force was seriously investigating or pretending. And now, the task force was not disbanded. There was no clear conclusion. Li Tianlan came directly to Yuyuzu from the desert. He hadn't been in Yuzhou for a long time, but until now no one in Zhongzhou state had raised any question about it. The existence of the task force seemed to have been completely forgotten. Lu Qing felt that he really seemed to have become a joke. He couldn't find any evidence, and he didn't know how long he would have to suffer in this courtyard house. He lay on the recliner, looking at the snowflakes in the sky, and said with numb eyes, "What do you want to eat for lunch? Instant noodles?" The middle-aged man who was smoking beside him looked depressed. He was different from Lu Qing. Lu Qing served as the team leader of the task force, and the Special Warfare Group had high hopes for him. They hoped that he could find some evidence that could directly hit Li Tianlan. He was shouldering a heavy burden. But with the departure of Yi Dongxing and Qin Fangqing, more and more people didn't take the task force seriously. Now the personnel transferred and were basically players who were not successful in various units. The middle-aged man's name was Li Liang. Before he came to the task force, he was the deputy director of a department of the police department. When he came, he also received a punishment. The others were roughly the same. For them, whether in their original units or in the task force, they were a joke, so it didn't matter where they were. "Let's eat hot pot." Lu Qing felt the cold in the air, and his heart was also cold. He was from Xinnan City, and at this time he particularly missed the hot pot in his hometown. "Are you treating?" Li Liang raised his head and glanced at him. "Do you want to drink at noon?" Lu Qing looked a little annoyed. After a moment of silence, he said hoarsely, "Then let's eat instant noodles." "Team leader is right. Let's eat hot pot. My treat." A hearty laugh suddenly rang out. A strong and burly figure walked in the door, and his voice was loud. Lu Qing's eyes narrowed and he said lightly, "Director Guo, you're in a good mood." Guo Yu, the director of the intelligence department of the General Staff Department, and the first deputy team leader of the task force. Under the situation that the General Staff Department was managed by Yi Dongxing, Guo Yu could be said to be Yi Dongxing's direct confidant. He was not pushed to be the deputy team leader of the task force, but he was here in name only and rarely appeared on weekdays. In other words, he still worked in the General Staff Department. The deputy team leader was a part-time job. And Lu Qing no part-time job. "Yes, I'm in a good mood." Guo Yu glanced at Lu Qing with a smile. Looking at his salted fish expression, Guo Yu's eyes were a little pitiful. He held the file in his hand and glanced at Lu Qing sympathetically. This team leader still didn't know what the file in his hand meant. "Don't rush to eat, team leader. I have something important to report to you." Guo Yu stopped smiling and said with a serious face. Lu Qing was stunned, and then subconsciously sat up straight. "There's progress in the case." "Yes." Guo Yu nodded. "The General Staff Department received some news that there's a major breakthrough in the case." He handed the file in his hand to Lu Qing and looked at him with more and more pity in his eyes. Lu Qing's hands and feet were cold, and his hand holding the file trembled a little. He didn't know what the so-called major breakthrough was. But the breakthrough in the General Staff Department made Guo Yu so happy. There was no doubt that this clue was beneficial to the Wang family of Beihai, or to Li Tianlan. And the person behind him absolutely didn't want to see this result. Lu Qing took the file and didn't dare to open it for a while. Lu Qing looked at him silently. He looked at his slightly trembling hand holding the file. Lu Qing lowered his head and opened the file little by little. Until this moment, he didn't know that maybe his hands would completely change the current situation of Zhongzhou state. The file was opened little by little. A confession that was obviously just recorded appeared in front of Lu Qing. The content of the confession was very long. There were a few pages of densely written paper. In addition to the confession, there were a few photos and a small recording device. Lu Qing kept taking deep breaths and flipping through the confession in front of him. The photos were mixed in the paper and appeared in front of him when he flipped through the confession. There was a middle-aged man in the photo. In front of the middle-aged man sat a dignified old man. Lu Qing's heart suddenly jumped. The huge pressure made him a little suffocated for a while. He stared at the photo in front of him, and seemed to be a little unbelievable. He trembled and said, "Who is this?" Guo Yu knew what he was asking. There were two people in the photo. One of them didn't need to be asked, but the other needed to be explained. He smiled and said in a firm voice, This person's code name is Black Eagle, a senior staff officer of the Burning Legion, a confidant of Legion Commander Ramelun, and one of the core military counselors of the Burning Legion. The confession is very clear that he was originally from Zhongzhou State, so after the Burning Legion took root in Tiannan, he was responsible for all the operations of the Burning Legion in Zhongzhou State. Guo Yu's voice was like thunder, rumbling in Lu Qing's ears. In other words, he is the main person in charge of everything of the Burning Legion in Zhongzhou State. Crack! The wooden deck chair suddenly broke. Lu Qing suddenly stood up and stared at Guo Yu. His expression was a little frightened, but more incredulous. You. He kept taking deep breaths and finally roared. How dare you? It's the truth. Guo Yu looked at him and said calmly, the evidence is in your hands. The photo slipped down with Lu Qing's trembling hand and fell on the snow. Li Liang, who was squatting and smoking, glanced at it and subconsciously broke the cigarette between his fingers. Lu Qing took a deep breath and couldn't speak for a while. The task force that had been set up for 2 years had investigated many times, but he never dreamed that there would be such a so-called evidence. To prove that Qi Mulin committed treason? Lu Qing laughed, laughing with incomparable fear. He found that his thinking was still too simple. In the photo, the person facing Black Eagle was not Qi Mulin at all. It was the top leader behind the scenes of the Special Warfare Group. Qi Baizong, the former director of Zhongzhou State, and the executive minister of the army headquarters. If the so-called evidence was spread, it would be a fierce storm that could sweep the whole Zhongzhou State. Lu Qing's voice was hoarse. What the hell do you want to do? Guo Yu bent down to pick up the photo and said lightly, I'm just doing my duty as a member of the task force. Chapter 889. Lu Qing looked down at the confession in his hand. The paper of the confession swayed slightly with the movement of his arm. He only felt that all this was extremely absurd. The confession was very long. The content was detailed and explosive. The man codenamed Black Shadow explained a lot of problems from beginning to end. To be exact, it was a series of cooperation problems between the Burning Legion and the Special Warfare Battalion. The target was not Qi Mulin. It was not even Qi Baizong. It was the whole Special Warfare Group. In the confession, Black Shadow said that the Burning Legion was Ramiro, the commander of the Burning Legion whom Qi Mulin met when he visited Africa. Then the cooperation between the two sides continued to deepen. As Emperor Dong's palace continued to develop and became a threat to Kunlun City, Gu Xingyun, the governor of Kunlun City, personally invited the Burning Legion to Tiannan and asked Ramiro to severely damage Emperor Dong's palace. Then the Burning Legion entered Tiannan and got the support of Annan State. The Burning Legion became a channel of communication between Kunlun City and Annan State. Up to now, the secret cooperation between the three parties had not stopped. In the past 2 years, Kunlun City had secretly leaked countless secrets of Zhongzhou State to the Burning Legion and Annan State. The confession was clear and concise. Even Lu Qing wasn't sure if this was true or not. True or false. It didn't matter. What mattered was that Guo Yu had gotten the information through his own channels. In the case that no one could determine the authenticity, the photos, the confession, and these clues had to be handed in. Whether it was true or false. Once these things entered the hidden Dragon Sea, they were destined to cause an extremely violent storm. Lu Qing himself was a member of the Special Warfare Group. He was the patriarch of the task force, and he was destined to be the one to hand in these things. He was standing in the center of the storm. When the wind suddenly rose, he didn't even have the room to resist, and he would be torn to pieces by the storm immediately. Lu Qing raised his head and looked at Guo Yu in front of him, his eyes dull. Guo Yu looked at him calmly, as if thinking about something. It was snowing heavily. The atmosphere in the courtyard suddenly became subtle. Guo Yu suddenly moved his body and said with a smile, "It is said that the team leader is an expert of the thunder-shocking realm?" Lu Qing said dully, "What do you want to say?" A little weak. Guo Yu chuckled and said, "The intelligence department of the General Staff Department is full of elites. Those who can get to the position of director are at least at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm. With the strength of the team leader, if he were in my place, he would at most be a section chief of a department." The corner of Lu Qing's mouth twitched. For a moment, He really wanted to kill him to keep his mouth shut. One Guoyu and a dozen or so idlers who were not welcomed by the various departments. It did not sound difficult. It was indeed not difficult. But the problem was that he was no match for Guoyu. You caught Black Hawk? Lu Qing asked in a low voice. Yes, 3 days ago, we locked onto Black Hawk's whereabouts and captured him on the same day. These days we have been secretly interrogating him. After getting his confession, I reported the news to General Yi and came here. Guoyu said calmly. Yi Dongxing was a member of Zhongzhou State, the deputy minister of the army headquarters, the chief of the general staff, and also the minister of the intelligence department. He could be said to be Guoyu's immediate superior. The news reached him. No matter what, it was impossible to suppress it. Lu Qing took a deep breath and said in a hoarse voice, Where is that shadow now? Is he still in your military intelligence agency? The General Staff Department should not deal with Black Shadow. So after getting this confession, we informed the Special Operations Bureau of Yuzhou. The director of the Special Operations Bureau came in person and took him away when I came. Lu Qing's heart sank slightly. The Special Operations Bureau of Yuzhou had always been within the sphere of influence of Kunlun City. After the Burning Legion raided Yuzhou, the former director was suspended and replaced by Drifting Cloud of Sai City. But because most of the people in the Special Operations Bureau were from Kunlun City, Drifting Cloud's work was not smooth. Since Sai City was not peaceful recently, Drifting Cloud resigned as the director of the Special Operations Bureau of Yuzhou and returned to Sai City with Situ Tsangyue. The new director of the Special Operations Bureau of Yuzhou was still a member of the Special Warfare Group and Gu Xingyun's confidant, named Gu Xi. The other party dared to hand Black Hawk over to the Special Operations Bureau of Yuzhou, which meant that he dared to hand Black Hawk over to the Special Warfare Group. What did it mean to hand over a witness who could testify that the leader of the Special Warfare Group committed treason to the Special Warfare Group? Was the other party fearless? Or were these confessions all true? Lu Qing's heart suddenly wavered. Once again, he recalled the contents of the confessions. Those contents clearly recorded Black Hawk's contact with Gu Xingyun and Qi Beizong. Some of them were even the original words. Gu Xingyun clearly expressed his uneasiness and irritation about the rise of Emperor Dong's palace. He thought of the cause of the rise of Kunlun City. But Li Tianlan, who had now reached the peak, the hatred was too deep, and there was no possibility of reconciliation. So Gu Xingyun mobilized the Burning Legion to raid Emperor Dong's palace in Tiannan? How logical it was. Lu Qing even somewhat believed it himself. After all, the special warfare system was different from others. There were too many dark sides and unseen places in it. The vague rules meant that there were too many means that could be used. And Gu Xingyun was not that kind of person. A man who was waiting for death would do something, and could do something when he saw Li Tianlan and the Li family rise from the ashes. Perhaps no one in Zhongzhou State would not believe this. Lu Qing was suddenly shocked and shook his head subconsciously. He actually began to doubt Gu Xingyun in his heart, doubting his own leader. He took a deep breath, held the document, looked at Guoyu, and was in a dilemma. Leader, maybe I should remind you. Guoyu said faintly, General Yi also has a copy of this information at this time. But this is the work of our task force. I think we should take some initiative. Lu Qing's mouth was full of bitterness. The so-called initiative was nothing more than to hand in the information before Yi Dongxing handed it over to the parliament. As a capable general of the Special Warfare Group, he had to hand in the evidence of the group's treason. This feeling was almost the same as the feeling of forcibly destroying oneself in a situation where one was unwilling to do so. But the information was already in his hands, and it was absolutely impossible not to hand it over. The only choice he could make was who to hand over the information first. Lu Qing took a deep breath, clenched the information in his hand, and said in a deep voice, I see. Guoyu grunted and looked at him motionless. Lu Qing was a little angry, subconsciously raised his voice, and snorted coldly. Prepare the car, go to the Hidden Dragon Sea. The car soon stopped at the gate of the courtyard. Lu Qing hurriedly got in the car with the information. The car started. Go to the Hidden Dragon Sea. Lu Qing said in a low voice, slow down, don't worry. The driver responded, and the car slowly left the courtyard. Lu Qing picked up the phone and dialed a number. It was difficult for him to directly contact Gu Xingyun at his level. He was looking for Gu Fengbo, the deputy governor of Kunlun City. What's the matter? Gu Fengbo's phone was quickly connected. Governor. Lu Qing managed to calm down and said in a hoarse voice, "Something is wrong." The General Staff Department caught an important figure of the Burning Legion, and he confessed some problems related to Kunlun City. I am now on my way to the Hidden Dragon Sea. Yi Dongsheng also has a copy of the same information. You'd better tell His Highness to be mentally prepared. Gu Fengbo was silent for a long time and did not speak. Lu Qing's heart became more and more chaotic. From Gu Fengbo's silence, he seemed to have a premonition of the authenticity of the information in his hand. Suddenly, the small amount of information in his hand became more and more hot. What information? Gu Fengbo asked. It's a confession and a few photos. I'll take them and send them to you, Lu Qing said. Chapter 890. There was a soft light in the almost luxurious study. The curtains were closed. One photo after another appeared on the screen connected to the mobile phone. Obviously, the photos taken by the mobile phone were placed on the screen. The content became a little blurred, but it was still clear. Because the photos were densely packed with words, the screen played very slowly. The photos rolled slowly one by one. The last one changed from words to images. In the photo, Qi Baizong, the former director of Zhongzhou State, looked gentle and seemed to be saying something to the middle-aged man sitting in front of him. Gu Fengbo, the deputy governor of Kunlun City, sat on one side of the sofa, frowning. Gu Xingyun was facing the screen, watching all this silently, and kept silent for a long time. Yi Dongsheng also has the same information, and even the original of this information is in his hands. Lu Qing has no way. I guess this information has now reached the Hidden Dragon Sea. Gu Fengbo said in a deep voice. It's ridiculous. Gu Xingyun twitched the corner of his mouth, and his voice was cold. His words showed enough confidence. Lu Qing was undoubtedly a smart man. So the confession he took with his mobile phone was all the key parts. For example, Black Hawk said that Kunlun City asked the Burning Legion to enter Tiannan to attack Emperor Dong's palace. For example, other things that Kunlun City asked the Burning Legion to do. For example, the initial contact between the Special Warfare Group and the Burning Legion. It even included some of the contents of the conspiracy between Qi Baizong and Gu Xingyun when he met them. These contents were indeed detailed enough. But in Gu Xingyun's eyes, everything was absurd to the extreme. Except that the so-called motive was correct. Everything else seemed to be off the mark. The initial contact between the Burning Legion and Kunlun City was not like this at all. As for the conversation between the man with the code name Black Hawk and Qi Baizong, it had never happened. Black Hawk said that he was the military counselor of the Burning Legion, and an important figure in contact with Kunlun City on behalf of the Burning Legion. He had seen Qi Baizong, Gu Xingyun, and Gu Qianchuan more than once, and they had also planned many things together. But in fact, Gu Xingyun had never seen Black Hawk at all. He had heard of this code name. Within the Burning Legion, Black Hawk was not even a core figure of the Burning Legion. He could barely be regarded as a high-level figure who had touched the surface. Gu Xingyun's expression was a little contemptuous, and he was a little angry in his heart, but he was not flustered. He had been in contact with the Burning Legion for a long time. It was true that Kunlun City was behind the Burning Legion's entry into Tiannan. However, Gu Xingyun was absolutely sure that he would not be caught. As for the things that Lu Qing had sent over, in his opinion, they were just child's play. They were the worst kind of framing. It didn't matter whether the leaders of the parliament believed it or not. It was naturally the best if they didn't believe it. Even if they believed it, Gu Xingyun did not panic at all. In the face of the confession sent by Lu Qing, he had 10,000 ways to easily prove the innocence of Kunlun City. A farce. Gu Xingyun shook his head. There's nothing to see. Maybe it's not just a farce. Gu Fengbo lowered his head and said thoughtfully, this may be a warning. Tell me what you think. Gu Xingyun looked at the screen in front of him and said calmly. Li Tianlan has just left the desert prison. It has been less than 24 hours since then, and this information suddenly appeared. What does this mean? Gu Fengbo laughed in a low voice. No matter what, this information is very important. If it can become a reality, it is indeed very important. Gu Xingyun said coldly. Li Tianlan entered the desert prison 2 years ago because he was guilty. The information that could prove Li Tianlan's innocence was extremely important. First of all, Li Tianlan had to get a firm foothold in leaving the prison. Everything that followed, including all of his revenge, could be carried out in a logical manner. Next, if there is no accident, Li Tianlan will pour all his firepower on the Prince Group. At this time, this information is obviously a warning to us not to interfere. If the information in the information, if it's really groundless, it can only prove that from the beginning, the Southeast Group has been suspecting that the Burning Legion has something to do with Kunlun City, but there is no evidence. Now that they have taken out this information, they want us to be overwhelmed. It's hard for you and Minister Qi to fall down, but Qi Mulan must be the scapegoat this time. They want to prove from the Special Warfare Group that Li Tianlan eliminated the Qi family for the sake of the country. At the same time, they want to disgust us and warn us not to support the Prince Group. Gu Fengbo shook his head. Gu Xingyun snorted coldly. Why should Qi Mulan be the scapegoat? I can easily explain the things mentioned in the information. They can't convict me, and Qi Mulan is naturally innocent. Li Tianlan will still have a stain on him. Black Hawk. Gu Fengbo was silent for a while and said in a low voice, no one is sure how much Black Hawk knows. After all, he is a senior of the Burning Legion. Even if what he revealed can't threaten us, he himself is a variable. The Wang family of Beihai made up the so-called evidence crudely, and didn't take it seriously. But who knows if they really have something? Even if what they have is far from the truth, it can still cause us great trouble. He picked up the teacup, took a sip and said in a low voice, in fact, I think Beihai must have something, but now they have no time to care about us. Li Tianlan, Wang Shengxiao, everyone is staring at the Prince Group, and we have become secondary. Take this opportunity to clear the suspicion of the Special Warfare Group, push Qi Mulan out, and prove Li Tianlan's innocence. Then this matter will be over. The Prince Group is obviously more tempting than us now. And he paused, and his face was a little complicated with fear. As soon as Li Tianlan left the desert, he killed First Elder with one sword strike. If he didn't continue, Li Tianlan could kill Gu Qianchuan in a second, and naturally he could kill Kunlun City. Even if the Special Warfare Group didn't cooperate, Li Tianlan could force Gu Xingyun to bow down. At least under that sword light, Kunlun City was now at a disadvantage in terms of strength and force in the face of Emperor Dong's palace. Now Li Tianlan and Wang Shengxiao only wanted to divide the interests of the Prince Group, and didn't care about the Special Warfare Group. But if they were serious, Gu Qianchuan also appeared in the desert, and Li Tianlan had every reason to blame him. Murderous weapon. Gu Xingyun gnashed his teeth. The sword that illuminated the desert night sky spread throughout the dark world as soon as it appeared. All the superpowers came to a relatively unanimous conclusion in the shortest time. That sword light could not be explained from any point of view of martial arts. It set off from Zhongyuan, passed Yan and Zhao, entered Dongshan, flew over Yuzhou, and went straight to Beihai. From Beihai, it passed through Longjiang Province, Suzhou Province, and entered the desert in one day. When the sword light completely lit up, from Beijiang to the desert prison, the sword light drew an arc of more than 100,000 meters. More than 100,000 meters. What did that mean? It was more than 100 kilometers away. At the moment when the sword light lit up, the sword energy had torn the ambitious team, destroyed the armored core, killed Gu Qianchuan in a second, and swallowed the murderous weapon setting Sunday. During the whole process, all the superpowers in the dark world had the most accurate test. Fast. Incredibly fast. From the appearance of the sword light to the death of Gu Qianchuan, it was more than 100 kilometers away. The whole process took 0.7 seconds. What did that mean? 0.7 seconds. No one could spread their sword energy to a distance of more than 100 kilometers in such a short time. The speed far beyond the speed of sound, the unparalleled destructive power, and the almost mythical flying distance all proved one thing. That sword was not Li Tianlan's sword. It was a murderous weapon. It was an unimaginably great power produced by the combination of many murderous weapons. The most terrifying thing was that with the continuous integration of the murderous weapons, the firepower of the murderous weapons seemed to be no longer pouring out at one time. With sufficient energy, Xian Yuanfeng had the conditions to use it many times. With Xian Yuanfeng's sword in hand, Li Tianlan in this state was even close to Wang Tianzong in Eastern Europe. He was truly invincible in the world. Kunlun City could not afford to offend such Li Tianlan. To be exact, they could not afford to offend him now. Xian Yuanfeng. The only thing they could do was to wait and retreat. The prince group was in a panic. The final battle in Beihai was about to begin. The battle was imminent. Kunlun City and even the entire Dark World were looking forward to the day when Xian Yuanfeng ran out of energy. Now Li Tianlan might still be terrible without the murderous weapon, but he was definitely not invincible. Gu Xingyun's facial muscles twitched, and he only felt a stuffiness in his heart. Murderous weapon. Murderous weapon again. From the rise of Kunlun City to the present, it had always been stuck in a bottleneck because of the murderous weapon. During the period when the Li family fell, the Wang family of Beihai had Wang Tianzong. With the human emperor in his hand, no one in the Dark World could fight against Wang Tianzong. Gu Xingyun managed to get the setting sun for Kunlun City at the cost of serious injury, but from beginning to end, he did not even have a chance to fire. Once again, it was swallowed and integrated by Li Tianlan's Xian Yuanfeng. Now, in the face of Emperor Dong's palace that was changing every day, he also did not dare to act rashly because of a murderous weapon. What was Li Tianlan without the murderous weapon? What was he? This question was actually not important. The important thing was that Li Tianlan now had a murderous weapon, and it was the strongest murderous weapon in the Dark World. Gu Xingyun rubbed his temples and was about to speak. The fax machine in the study suddenly made a harsh sound. Lu Qing had sent all the complete information and photos over. This time, Gu Fengbo looked at the time and said, "Lu Qing has come out of the hidden dragon sea." He took all the information and handed it to Gu Xingyun. "It's all here." Gu Xingyun nodded, took it, and looked at it carefully. The first page of the confession was full of content that seemed to be true, but was actually absurd. The second page was probably the same. Gu Xingyun casually threw the first 2 pages aside, and turned to the third page. He raised his eyebrows and then frowned tightly. Then the 4th page. The study suddenly became extremely quiet. Gu Xingyun's face began to become more and more gloomy, and even a little frightened. His palm holding the information was trembling slightly. Lu Qing thought that the most important confession he had uploaded at the beginning was completely wrong. Those absurd conversations seemed to be important, but in fact they were meaningless. But the things that Lu Qing did not send at the beginning were the real fatal things. These included the arrangement of the Burning Legion in Tiannan after accepting the invitation of Kunlun City, the way to enter Tiannan, the channels used, the approximate number of people, and the exchange of interests, and the retreat channel of the Burning Legion after the raid on Yuzhou that day. Gu Xingyun's breathing became more and more rapid. These couldn't be things that Black Hawk could access. But it didn't matter. What mattered was that everything in the confession was true. This was obviously not the intelligence handled by Black Hawk. Why did he know? Gu Xingyun gasped, and suddenly threw the information in his hand into the air. Gu Fengbo was startled. When he was about to say something, the red confidential phone in the study suddenly rang. Gu Xingyun's body shook, and his face was a little pale. He moved over little by little, and answered the phone. "Xingyun, it's me." On the other end of the phone, Qi Baitsong's low voice sounded. Gu Xingyun took a deep breath and answered. "Do you know about Black Hawk?" Qi Baitsong asked. "I just received the information, and I'm still reading it." Gu Xingyun said. "Black Hawk has now been handed over to Yuzhou Special Operations Bureau. Do you know about this?" Qi Baitsong's voice was slow and hoarse. "I know." Gu Xingyun nodded. Yuzhou Special Operations Bureau was his territory. After Drifting Cloud resigned, all the people from the director to the deputy director were his people. Qi Baitsong answered. He was silent for a long time and then whispered, "Black Hawk is dead." He died less than half an hour after entering the Special Operations Bureau. Gu Xingyun answered. Then he suddenly widened his eyes and his face changed dramatically. Chapter 891. Black Eagle died. He died in Yuzhou Special Operations Bureau. The moment he heard the news, Gu Xingyun felt his blood freeze. It was as if he was suddenly covered by a big net. For the Southeast Group, Black Hawk's death was meaningless to them with the mixed and false confession. But for the Special Warfare Group, the death of Black Eagle meant endless trouble. Big trouble. He somehow thought of the resignation of Yuzhou Special Operations Bureau Director Drifting Cloud a few days ago. He thought that the General Staff Department would agree to hand Black Eagle over to Yuzhou Special Operations Bureau. Then Black Eagle died as soon as he entered Yuzhou Special Operations Bureau. All of this seemed like a trap. Drifting Cloud did serve as the director of Yuzhou Special Operations Bureau. But everyone knew that it was Gu Xingyun's territory. After Drifting Cloud resigned, the new director, Gu Ci, was Gu Xingyun's confidant. The entire Yuzhou Special Operations Bureau was made up of the elites of Kunlun City. From the director, the two deputy directors, the staff officer, to the middle-level officers, they were all from Kunlun City. So the whole scene looked very clear. The General Staff Department caught Black Eagle of the Burning Legion and found the evidence of treason of Kunlun City, and even the leader of the Special Warfare Group. After getting the evidence, the General Staff Department handed over the criminal to Yuzhou Special Operations Bureau according to the normal procedure. The criminal with the evidence of treason of the Special Warfare Group entered the territory of the Special Warfare Group. Then he died. Well, it was that simple. What did it mean? As long as they weren't stupid, everyone would think it was to kill him. If everything recorded in the confession was a complete lie, then the death of Black Eagle didn't mean anything. But the problem was that many key clues in the confession were true. Black Eagle shouldn't have touched them, but he knew them and presented them in the confession. Even if those things were carefully handled, it was impossible to leave no clues. The most important thing was that the Burning Legion avoided the route of Yozhou's search from Yuzhou. This kind of thing couldn't be completely cleaned up. And now, the General Staff Department already knew about it, which meant that Yi Dongxing had some clues. If Gu Xingyun cleaned it up, it would only cause more trouble. Gu Xingyun took a deep breath, and his face suddenly became extremely ugly. How did Black Eagle die? He asked in a deep voice while holding the phone. Suicide. Qi Baitsong's voice was hoarse. Gu Ci has already checked his body immediately. There is no sign of poisoning, and his mind is normal. This sentence blocked most of the possibilities. Gu Xingyun rubbed his forehead and muttered to himself, "Suicide. Do you believe it?" Qi Baitsong asked. Gu Xingyun smiled bitterly. It was not a matter of whether he believed it or not, but whether others would believe it or not. If this matter was not handled well, it would definitely be fatal to the Special Warfare Group. Li Tianlan. Wang Shengxiao. Gu Xingyun's voice was cold and he gnashed his teeth. What a big appetite. Qi Baitsong remained silent. Gu Xingyun held the phone and didn't know what to say for a while. Forget about Mulin's matter for now. After an unknown period of time, Gu Xingyun said in a low voice. Qi Baitsong took a deep breath on the other end of the phone. Just from this sentence alone, he had already confirmed that not everything in the confession was a false accusation. In other words, Kunlun City and the Burning Legion were really related. Otherwise, even if the death of Black Hawk would make Kunlun City very passive, it was fake after all, and the confession could not cause too much damage to the Special Warfare Group. Qi Baitsong was silent for a long time before he said in a low voice, "What are you going to do?" The corner of Gu Xingyun's mouth twitched fiercely. He gnashed his teeth and said, "Fill their appetite first." It was not until the moment of Black Hawk's death that he understood. This confession was not a warning given to him by Li Tianlan and Wang Shengxiao. This confession was a knife. A knife ready to cut the flesh of the Special Warfare Group. If Chen Fangqing lost this game, the Prince Group was bound to suffer an unprecedented blow. With the in-depth investigation of this confession, the status of the Special Warfare Group would inevitably decline again, and its strength would further shrink. How much the Special Warfare Group and the Prince Group would lose. How much Li Tianlan and the others would gain. Even if these gains were divided equally, the part Li Tianlan got could barely support the embryonic form of a group. Bang! The red confidential phone was crushed in his hand. Gu Fengbo was startled and subconsciously stood up from the sofa. My lord, it's okay. Gu Xingyun threw the fragment in his hand to the ground. His eyes flickered and he whispered, just bear with him for a year. He took a deep breath and murmured, just a year. Golden Autumn Pavilion, Hidden Dragon Sea. The president's office was filled with smoke. The atmosphere was so oppressive that it almost solidified. Only the sound of turning pages echoed occasionally. Although Lu Qing's report had been delayed as much as possible, the information was still handed in. Although he thought his task force was a joke, Zhongzhou State still gave Lu Qing the right to enter the Hidden Dragon Sea at any time to show the importance it attached to this matter. And it was in this office that Lu Qing reported the information in his hand to the three most powerful counselors in Zhongzhou State: President Li Huacheng, Prime Minister Chen Fangqing, and Dong Qingwudi, the Minister of the Army Headquarters. At this moment, the three giants, who were completely supreme in Zhongzhou State, were all looking down at the confession in their hands in silence. After the first time, the three of them looked at it very carefully for the second time. Everyone's brows were tightly furrowed, their faces solemn. Yi Dongxing sat aside, sipped his tea silently, and watched the three leaders looking through the information in their hands without saying a word. He came a little later than Lu Qing, but he reported the same thing. As an insider, he was also asked to stay. In the crisp sound of the lighter, Dong Qingwudi lit another cigarette and took a deep breath. Yi Dongxing observed them calmly. As the president, Li Huacheng's emotional ups and downs were the most obvious. The confession was detailed and reasonable, and the logic was extremely clear. Yi Dongxing could clearly feel his anger. But besides the anger, he also had some doubts. It seemed that he didn't believe the content of the information. At least, he didn't believe all of it. Chen Fangqing was also reading the information. It was said that he fainted outside in the morning and suffered some flesh injuries when he met with Li Tianlan. At this time, the death of the chairman of Haoyue Group was already a hot topic. In one morning, Chen Fangqing lost his daughter, nephew, and granddaughter. The huge blow made him unable to recover at all. At this time, he sat here absent-mindedly. Although he also maintained anger, he was more worried and resentful. Yi Dongxing smiled silently. The information in his hand was submitted at the perfect time. The academics had parted ways with the Prince Group. At this time, Chen Fangqing's most powerful ally, the Special Warfare Group, was in trouble. The next counterattack could be completely focused on the Prince Group. That was probably why Chen Fangqing was worried. He looked at Dong Qingwudi. Dong Qingwudi was calm and expressionless, without any emotion. Yi Dongxing slowly lowered his head, took out a cigarette, and lit it. What do you think? In a somewhat ethereal voice, Li Huacheng suddenly raised his head and waved the confession in his hand. He didn't ask Dong Qingwudi, nor did he ask Chen Fangqing. Instead, he looked directly at Yi Dongxing. Yi Dongxing was a little surprised, but then he understood. He could be said to be the first person to come into contact with this confession. At this time, of course, it was reasonable for the president to ask his opinion. That photo doesn't prove anything, Yi Dongxing said with a smile. Li Huacheng subconsciously narrowed his eyes. Chen Fangqing raised his eyebrows in surprise. There was only one photo. It was the one where Qi Baitsong and Black Hawk met. In fact, as soon as I got the photo, I had already asked the ministry to do an identification. The identification result is very clear. The photo is fake, something that has been synthesized. Yi Dongxing said lightly, we can't be sure if Black Hawk has met with Minister Qi, but at least there is no proof in the confession. Li Huacheng's body seemed to be a little relaxed. He said calmly, you mean this confession is not credible? Not really. Yi Dongxing's response was concise and powerful. He paused and continued, but it is not low. Make it clear. Chen Fangqing said slowly. His headache was getting worse recently. There are many things in the confession that can't be confirmed for the time being. You need to talk to His Highness Gu Xingyun about this to see what the problem is. But there are some things that the comrades of the Military Intelligence Bureau of the Ministry of Intelligence have launched a preliminary investigation. One thing is certain. When the Burning Legion attacked Yuzhou, someone in the Special Warfare Group did provide them with convenience during the evacuation. This clue is very important. At present, we have secretly controlled several key figures, Yi Dongxing said slowly. It's just that this case is very sensitive. After knowing this, I have temporarily stopped the investigation. If I continue to investigate, no one knows who will be involved. I hope the Parliament can give me enough authorization and trust, or we can pretend that we don't know that someone in the Special Warfare Group committed treason. Hearing this, not only Chen Fangqing, but also Li Huaqing had no way out. He opened his mouth and glanced at Dongqing Wudi. Dongqing Wudi's expression was calm. Pretend that we don't know? Are we going to let the vermin continue to destroy the good situation? Investigate. We must investigate. No matter who is involved, we must investigate to the end. The corner of Chen Fangqing's mouth twitched, and he did not speak. Li Huaqing's face was as calm as water. He nodded slowly and said, I agree with Minister Dongqing. We must investigate, and we must investigate it strictly. I need the formal authorization of the Parliament, Yi Dongxing said, without looking at Chen Fangqing. Li Huaqing nodded and gestured to Dongqing Wudi. Okay, Dongqing Wudi said slowly. From now on, a special task force will be set up to investigate the problems of the Special Warfare Group. I will be the team leader, and you will be the standing director. You can mobilize the personnel of the Military Intelligence Bureau, the Ministry of Security, the Police Department, various troops, and the Special Operations Bureau everywhere to join the task force. My only requirement is to be fast. We must find out the vermin in the Special Warfare Group as soon as possible. I understand. Yi Dongxing nodded and glanced at Chen Fangqing. His eyes were full of meaning. Chen Fangqing took a deep breath and rubbed his head, which seemed to be splitting, with a gloomy face. He knew very well. If his daughter's death was just the revenge of Emperor Dong's palace, and the Wang family of Beihai against him, then the information in front of him was the beginning of the official counterattack of the Southeast Group and the Giant Group. He had no way out. There were about 20,000 soldiers in each of the two legions. Immediately, some organizations in the Snow Country Special Warfare System began to join the army. So far, Sai City had not collected detailed relevant information, so it could only guard the border of Mount Taibai. The wind was biting cold. The icy wind blew the snow on Mount Taibai. Snow fluttered in the air, and the world was a blur. Situt Songyue stood expressionlessly on a hillside, gazing at the Snow Empire military camp in the distance. This was the most typical mountainous environment. The terrain was steep and complex, and the undulating peaks were covered with snow. The harsh terrain formed the border between the two countries. Most of the time, the border between the two countries did not even need to be guarded by soldiers. This terrain also meant that even if there was a war between Zhongzhou State and Snow Country, it was unlikely that there would be a large-scale battle between soldiers in this area. The snow, the peaks, and the rugged mountain roads were enough to make most infantry powerless. If this place became a battlefield, the most likely outcome would be firepower coverage or airdrop tactics. Situt Songyue watched all this silently, looking at the shining light in the distant military camp. She was silent for a long time. She knew very well what the purpose of the Snow Country Army, which was separated by mountains and snow a few kilometers away, was. She also knew what Zhongzhou State's attitude toward this matter was. The Snow Country Army on the opposite side. To put it bluntly, it was Wang Xiaoyao's force. Wang Xiaoyao was controlling the Dark World, and the entire special warfare system of Snow Country step by step. In 2 years, his strength had expanded extremely rapidly. Wang Xiaoyao and Wang Qinglei were partners. Wang Qinglei and Chen Fangqing were partners. Obviously, Wang Xiaoyao wanted to use the power of Snow Country to drag her, and even the entire Sai City here. The timing was delicate. The location was also delicate. In such a complex and harsh environment, Zhongzhou State did not have to worry that the army of Snow Country would invade Zhongzhou State. Moreover, there was Wang Xiaoyao's guarantee, which was equal to double insurance. Chen Fangqing also hoped that Situt Songyue would stay in Sai City, so he would not take any action, nor would he provide them with support. Slight footsteps stepped on the snow on the ground, and he slowly walked behind Situt Songyue. Governor. Drifting Cloud's voice sounded. Situt Songyue answered. I think I understand why Minister Dongqing suggested me to resign a few days ago. Drifting Cloud glanced at the military camp in front and whispered with a smile. Situt Songyue stared into the distance, took a deep breath, and turned to look at him. What do you mean? Something happened to the Special Operations Bureau of Yuzhou, and it's big trouble. Zhongzhou State now has the news that the Special Warfare Group has committed treason. The cause of this matter is the General Staff Department. The General Staff Department caught an important figure of the Burning Legion. He confessed a lot of things, and some evidence has been found. The witness was killed when he was handed over to the Special Operations Bureau of Yuzhou. Drifting Cloud's voice was a little playful. Situt Songyue was stunned and asked subconsciously, silencing him? Who knows? Drifting Cloud lowered his head and whispered. The General Staff Department should have reported this matter to Minister Dongqing in advance, so the minister asked me to resign. If there is no accident, in the next few days, the Special Operations Bureau of Yuzhou will be replaced. Gu Xi will not end well, and the entire Special Operations Bureau of Yuzhou will probably be replaced. Situt Songyue was silent for a while and whispered. Do you want to go back? Drifting Cloud, who had resigned as the director of the Special Operations Bureau of Yuzhou a few days ago, looked at her seriously. I'm waiting for your decision. Situt Songyue's body stiffened for a moment. She knew very well what Drifting Cloud was talking about. He had said this so-called decision once a few years ago. This was not a decision about Drifting Cloud's position. It was a decision about the future of Sai City. His Highness Li Tianlan's return this time is bound to start a new group. Saint told you this before, and now the conditions are met. The Prince Group, the Special Warfare Group, and everything they lost can become the framework of His Highness Li Tianlan's new group. Drifting Cloud said calmly. In this case, what role should Sai City play in the new group? Should it continue to stay in Mount Taibai, or should it have another direction? Situt Songyue looked at the wind and snow in front of her. The wind and snow were messy, passing through her sight. At that moment, it seemed that many years had passed. There were few people in Sai City, but it had a super strong cohesion that most forces did not have. Situt Songyue was in the invincible realm. Tribulation was also in the invincible realm. Cool Breeze and Drifting Cloud were superiors of the half-step invincible realm. There were 7 superiors above the thunder-shocking realm in Sai City. There were nearly 100 assassins above the stabilization phase of the fire-flaming realm in Sai City. For today's Emperor Dong's palace, this was definitely an absolutely powerful force. It was also a force that could be digested by the current scale of Emperor Dong's palace. If Situt Songyue did not intend to change anything, Sai City would still be Sai City. But if Sai City wanted to change its direction, and play a more important role in the new group controlled by Li Tianlan, Cool Breeze and Drifting Cloud, the other 5 thunder-shocking realm assassins of Sai City, dozens of fire-flaming realm experts, all of them could find their own positions in the new group. Situt Songyue lowered her head slightly and stared at the snow in front of her. The stunning sword in the 13-story building was still standing there, as if it was also staring at Situt Songyue. Drifting Cloud looked ahead and opened his mouth. When he was about to say something, his eyes suddenly froze. His line of sight crossed a few kilometers ahead. In the wind and snow, in front of the shining gate of the barracks, a group of about hundreds of soldiers of Snow Country roared and rushed forward for a distance. At the forefront, a tall soldier held the flag of his legion and ran for hundreds of meters. Then he inserted the flag in the snow again. In the vision of an expert a half-step to invincible realm, Drifting Cloud clearly saw that the flagrant military flag crossed the boundary monument of Zhongzhou State. The flag crossed the boundary monument in a short distance. It was even less than 1 meter. But the distance of dozens of centimeters was indeed the territory of Zhongzhou State. Drifting Cloud's face was livid, and he suddenly raised his hand. Suddenly, a dark blue electric arc lit up in the air where the snow was fluttering. The electric arc extended for hundreds of meters in the air, and finally disappeared without a trace. A burst of indistinct laughter suddenly rang out. In his sight, the soldier of Snow Country holding the Legion flag gave a thumbs up to Drifting Cloud and Situt Songyue, and then he pointed it down fiercely. He laughed and pulled out the flag. Once again, he rushed forward for tens of meters and directly inserted the flag in the snow of Zhongzhou State. A ghastly cry and wolf howl came from afar. Situd Songyue looked at this scene expressionlessly. Bang! In the dull sound, a cannonball suddenly shot out from the small weapons base of Sai City, giving a warning. The soldiers of Snow Country took a step back. And then the ghastly cry and wolf howl became louder. The huge sound wave of hundreds of people successfully attracted the attention of the Snow Country barracks behind. More and more soldiers left the barracks and came over. The cannonball landed on the land 5 kilometers away from the army of Snow Country, making a loud noise. The rear of the Snow Country barracks instantly lit up with bright fire. Several huge cannonballs with burning tail flames crossed the sky and headed straight for Sai City. The cannonball flew in the air and finally exploded a large amount of snow at the foot of the mountain less than 1 kilometer away from Situd Songyue. Drifting Cloud could even clearly feel the violent vibration of the ground. Drifting Cloud's face was livid. He gritted his teeth and spat out a swear word after a long while. F***ck. Situd Songyue's eyes narrowed tightly. The world seemed to be tense for a moment. A cold and awe-inspiring voice rang out in the midst of the snowstorm. Scram. The voice of the invincible realm expert spread into the mountains, through the wind and snow, and directly echoed in the barracks of Snow Country. Situd Songyue was responded by 2 cannonballs. The artillery roared. This time, the landing point of the artillery moved forward another 200 meters. This landing point was less than 100 meters away from the real edge of Sai City. F***ck Governor, Qing Feng and I will kill our way over. Drifting Cloud suddenly took a step forward. No matter how calm he was, he couldn't stand this kind of provocation. In the past 20 years, Sai City had indeed stood aloof from the world, but who really dared to provoke them? Drifting Cloud couldn't stand this kind of arrogance. Don't be impulsive. Situd Songyue shook her head. They just want us to rush over. Sai City is afraid of them. Drifting Cloud sneered and said, they are just clowns. How many people in Snow Country can be a match for Qing Feng and me? There may not be many individuals, but there is an army in front of us. Even if we can beat them back, their artillery is enough to destroy Sai City. Besides, they can withdraw from the national border at any time. If there is a dispute at that time, it is tantamount to making trouble for Tianlan. Situd Songyue said calmly, ignore them. As long as I'm still here, they won't dare to act rashly. Since Tianlan has come out, we don't need to worry about the outside world. If they want to delay, let them. Drifting Cloud looked at the barracks opposite with a cold expression and said nothing. There were more and more soldiers of Snow Country in front of the military flag. A large number of soldiers of Snow Country stood blatantly on the land of Zhongzhou State, shouting and swearing. The language of Snow Country was mixed with English and a few words of poor Chinese. They were laughing and joking, but the content was full of the most vicious curses. Bitch! Whore! All kinds of obscenities came along with the wind and snow. Situd Songyue took a deep breath, and her expression became colder. She quietly clenched her fists. Buzz! The startling sword, which had been standing in front of Situd Songyue, suddenly trembled and made a buzz. The sound was with clear excitement and desire. Boom! Another row of cannonballs came from the barracks of Snow Country. The fiery red light penetrated the wind and snow. Looking at the landing point, this row of cannonballs would almost certainly fall on the edge of Sai City. Situd Songyue suddenly looked up, and her pupils contracted. Her clenched fists trembled slightly, and she raised them for a moment. Her body, which was about to make a move, suddenly stiffened, and her face changed. An extremely fierce wind suddenly appeared over Sai City. The wind blew the snow. In an instant, there was a mighty and indescribable storm between heaven and earth. The whole world seemed to be suddenly quiet in an instant. Snowflakes fluttered. The fiery red light dragged by the cannonball disappeared almost instantly. Then the cannonball with great destructive power completely disintegrated. Situd Songyue suddenly raised her head and looked ahead with an extremely solemn face. Drifting Cloud was stunned. He opened his mouth, but suddenly found that he could not make a sound. The world became extremely quiet. The world was originally quiet. The sound of the fierce wind had already disappeared. But there was an extremely heavy airflow between heaven and earth. The airflow filled the world and turned into a silent gale. The gale rolled up the flying snow and turned into a storm. The storm did not seem to move fast. Or it did not move at all. Because the moment the storm formed, it had already filled the whole world. The crazy dancing snowflakes filled the sky, filled the valley, and occupied everything in sight. The silent wind, the flying blood, they covered the sky and covered the earth as they spun. Everything in Sai City was surrounded by the storm. Neither Situt Songyue nor Drifting Cloud could see the beginning or the end of the storm. Only the startling sword continued to vibrate, producing sword chimes one after another. Situt Songyue raised her head and looked at the swirling wind and snow in front of her, as if she was looking at a rotating world. Everywhere she looked, there was a vast expanse of white. There was no sound. In the state of extreme silence, the swirling snowflakes that filled the world seemed to gradually change color. The color deepened little by little and gradually faded. It seemed to be a light pink, then turned into a slight red, and finally became an extremely dazzling scarlet. All the snowflakes turned into a shocking red. The strong smell of blood rose on the extremely quiet blood mountain, which was extremely strange. Abruptly, the storm, which seemed to have been dyed red by blood, seemed to stop rotating. The speed of the storm was getting slower and slower. In the light footsteps, a figure passed through the storm and walked to Situt Songyue. He carried a soldier of Snow Country who had fainted in his hand and said with a smile, "Aunt Situ, long time no see." Chapter 893. Situt Songyue stared blankly at the figure coming out of the storm. The bloody storm between heaven and earth had solidified. His pace was neither fast nor slow. As if nothing had happened, he did it as if it were light and understated. This was an indescribable casualness and indifference. She heard him call her Aunt Situ. That face was still so familiar. But in Situt Songyue's heart, he seemed to be a completely different person. He might still be him. But in more than 2 years, whether it was spirit, mentality, or martial arts, he seemed to have transformed and sublimated to another level. "Tianlan," she called out subconsciously. Li Tianlan nodded, and threw the soldier of Snow Country to the ground. The soldier was majestic and burly, wearing a neat military uniform. Judging from his rank, he was a general. At this time, he was lying on the ground like a dead pig, silent. Li Tianlan looked down at him and fell silent. He didn't speak. The world became dead silent in an instant. The indescribable bloody storm seemed to be slowing down. It also seemed to be accelerating. The rotation of the storm became more and more blurred, as if it was too fast or too slow, and finally became a state of complete stillness. There was only a still blood red in front of Drifting Cloud. The pungent smell of blood filled the air like water. The red in front of him occupied everything in sight. The snow was gone. The mountains were gone. The valley was gone. All he could see was this still red. He couldn't hear any sound, and he couldn't see the opposite barracks. In the indescribable silence, Drifting Cloud's chest became more and more stuffy, and he only felt that his whole body became heavier and heavier. In a trance, the still storm seemed to make the first roar. It was a very familiar sound. It was like a strong wind blowing up the snow. Snowflakes were flying in the air, like white catkins all over the sky. Drifting Cloud stared at the still red in front of him. The still red began to rotate again, faster and faster, with an extremely sharp sound. The almost dark red began to fade, mixed with white, and rotated wildly. Li Tianlan still stood, silently looking down at the unconscious general of Snow Country at his feet. The faintly discernible sword chi kept vibrating around him. The bloody storm became thinner and thinner with the vibration of the sword energy. Faintly, Drifting Cloud saw the valleys and peaks blocked by the bloody storm. The smell of blood began to surge. The bloody storm became more and more chaotic. White snow. The red blood spread wildly in all directions. The process seemed slow, but it was also extremely fast. It seemed to only take a breath's time. The storm was gone. The red that filled the sky also disappeared. The silence turned into silence. Lu Yun subconsciously took a deep breath and looked at his surroundings. They were still standing in the same place. There was no change in the snow mountain. The valley remained unchanged. Sai City remained unchanged. Lu Yun looked at everything that was familiar to him, and his eyes suddenly froze. An incomprehensible emotion arose in his eyes, and it transformed into astonishment, shock, absurdity, and finally a wisp of indescribable terror. His body stiffened on the spot, like a petrified statue. The sound of rapid and heavy breathing came out from the side of his mouth. His eyes were open to the widest, staring in the direction of the Snow Empire military camp. In his line of sight, the boundary monument was still there. The flag of Snow Country Corps on the land of Zhongzhou State was still there. The military camp of Snow Country was still brightly lit. Lu Yun recalled the blood-colored storm. He had thought that after the storm, he would see countless corpses, a large scene of suffering, and Li Tianlan's current strength. But, no, there was nothing. He didn't see the corpses or the wounded. It was quiet on Mount Taibai. Everything in sight was white snow. No corpses, no wounded, no army, no army. No army. The military camp of Snow Country was still there. But in that quiet storm, all the creatures in the Snow Empire's military camp had completely disappeared. It was as if they had never existed. Lu Yun opened his mouth, like a dying fish. All this was beyond his imagination. Even if he was a superior a half-step to invincible realm. A subtle sound rang in the valley. In an instant, the sword energy that seemed to cover the world began to gather toward Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan, who had been quiet, moved and breathed out softly. Situ Songyue took a deep look at Li Tianlan. Compared with Lu Yun, she naturally knew the power of that sword move better. That was really tearing everything apart. At that moment, the area covered by the storm became the domain of sword energy. Pure sword energy. Countless strands of sword chi surged within the domain. Every strand of sword chi collided with other strands of sword chi countless times. The sword chi shattered into even smaller strands of sword chi. The vast sword energy completely tore the corpses of the soldiers of Snow Country, leaving no trace of their existence. No, there might still be traces, but all the blood had been covered by snow. There were 2 legions and several elites of Snow Country from the Special Warfare Agency. This kind of sword energy, as far as Situ Songyue knew, there seemed to be only one person who could do it. Wang Tianzong. It was Wang Tianzong before Eastern Europe. This was the power that faintly surpassed the peak of the invincible realm. But she was an invincible realm superior, and could roughly feel Li Tianlan's state. Whether it was his age or his actual performance, he didn't seem to have really entered the invincible realm. So how did he do it? Situ Songyue quietly looked at Li Tianlan, who was motionless. She was a little relieved, but also inexplicably upset. Your Highness, this. Lu Yun finally came back to his senses and stammered. Why are you here? Situ Songyue smiled and said, It's not urgent here. No, it's urgent. Li Tianlan shook his head. He slowly moved his arm. Crack. In an instant, the sound of countless joints vibrating came out of Li Tianlan's body. His face turned pale for a moment. In Lu Yun's sight, he clearly saw a shocking bloodstain on Li Tianlan's arm. Li Tianlan's skin suddenly began to break at some point, spreading to his 5 fingers, palms, back of hands, wrists, and even to the invisible place in his sleeves. One of his arms was like broken glass, densely packed and full of cracks for a while. Situ Songyue's eyes suddenly froze. Li Tianlan looked at his arm expressionlessly. This was the hand that held the sword. His cracked palm slowly clenched into a fist. Fresh blood flowed down his chest and palms, falling onto the snowy ground. It was a ghastly sight. I'm fine, he said in a low voice. Situ Songyue did not speak. She stared at his palm, and her eyes trembled slightly. The blood dripping quickly became less and less. There seemed to be a dense mist in Li Tianlan's palm. Large patches of blood and dense cracks began to become blurred in the mist. Li Tianlan's body slowly relaxed and kicked the general of Snow Country under his feet. The general groaned and opened his eyes blankly. His memory was still stuck just now. He was just ordering the artillery of the barracks to fire again when he was suddenly pulled by a hand. When he woke up, he was here. Where was this place? The general was slightly shocked and suddenly got up. He saw Li Tianlan, Situ Songyue, and Drifting Cloud, as well as his empty and silent barracks. Where's my army? he said subconsciously, and finally realized where he was. It didn't matter where he was. What mattered was who was beside him. The general's face was pale, and he took a step forward subconsciously. A subtle sound was heard accompanied by screams. Countless densely packed sword chi enveloped everything around the general. He took a step forward and his body directly hit a large piece of sword energy. The sword energy went deep into his body. In an instant, his military uniform was directly dyed red with blood. The general howled wildly, and his eyes were filled with pain and fear. Name. Li Tianlan lowered his head and looked at him condescendingly. Tarkov, no. The general answered in a trembling voice. Countless sword energy went deep into his body, and did not seem to disappear at all. Instead, they were destroying his flesh and blood bit by bit as if they were alive. The unprepared encounter almost crushed his will at once. It's too long, I can't remember. Li Tianlan said lightly, just call him Tatev. It's Tarkov. The general groaned in his heart, but his Chinese was a little bad, and he was not in the mood to explain anything. His body curled up and kept trembling under the pain. Your army has crossed the boundary. Li Tianlan looked at him and said quietly, Yes, yes. General Tarkov shouted. He wanted to raise his voice, but his words were extremely weak. I'm willing to apologize on behalf of my army. Who do you think you are? Li Tianlan looked at him silently. Your apology is worthless. He reached out and grabbed Tarkov's bloody body, pointing to the flag of Snow Country that was still stuck in the snow of Zhongzhou State. Did you see it? Li Tianlan asked. Yes, yes. Tarkov nodded frantically. His legs gradually became wet, and a suspicious liquid flowed down his trousers. Now contact your boss. Li Tianlan's voice was low and gloomy. Before dark, there must be a person who can represent Snow Country. The president, the prime minister, your defense general, anyone. Ask him to come here, pull out your flag from the land of Zhongzhou State, and make a public apology. Otherwise, within half a month, I will personally put the star flag of Zhongzhou State in front of the gate of your capital. He paused and looked at Tarkov. Do you understand? Yes, I understand. Tarkov kept nodding. Li Tianlan casually threw him to the ground and said calmly, I'm here waiting for your country's apology. Drifting Cloud's body trembled, and he did not dare to speak for a while. Situt Songyue took a deep breath and suddenly laughed. At this moment, she seemed to have made up her mind. Chapter 894. General Tarkov, whose full name was unknown, tremblingly took out his mobile phone. It was obvious that the general of Snow Country stationed at the border was frightened, and his voice trembled when he called his superior. Li Tianlan didn't understand Russian, and didn't bother to listen to what he was talking about on the phone. He just reached out and touched the hilt of the startling sword, as if saying hello. The startling sword trembled slightly, and the hilt rubbed against Li Tianlan's palm. It looked very happy. It's hard for the representatives of Snow Country to come before dark. Situt Songyue looked at Li Tianlan and said softly, to some extent, Snow Country's bureaucracy in some aspects could be said to be the most serious in the world. The story of destroying 2 legions in a storm outside Sai City was indeed shocking enough. But Snow Country, as one of the toughest nations in the world, could hardly be completely subdued because of this. They might compromise, but Li Tianlan didn't leave any room for compromise. Li Tianlan's requirement was that before dark, the president, prime minister, or the defense general of Snow Country should apologize in person, walk to the border of Zhongzhou State, and take their flag back. Even if the high-level individuals would be frightened by Li Tianlan, the army of Snow Country couldn't bear this kind of humiliation. It was equivalent to an outsider asking Zhongzhou State to make Li Huaqing, Chen Fangqing, or Dongqing Wudi apologize and pull out the flag planted by their own soldiers. This was a great humiliation. So in Situt Songyue's view, not only before dark, the 3 giants of Snow Country might not come back at all. Even more exaggeratedly, the news wouldn't reach the ears of the 3 giants in a short time. I know. Li Tianlan said quietly. Situt Songyue answered with some doubts. So I gave them half a month. Li Tianlan said slowly. Even if I have shown enough strength, it's easy for them to focus on other places. The chaos in Beihai is close at hand. It's normal that the military camp of Snow Country doesn't retreat, and the high-level officials of Snow Country don't come, because they are waiting for the end of Beihai. And the state of your sword? Situd Songyue said calmly. He destroyed 2 legions with 1 sword strike. Even if it was an army formed by 2 groups of people, such destructive power was enough to make people feel like their guts were being torn apart. But in comparison, this sword was still inferior to the sword light that could reach tens of thousands of meters in an instant in the desert. The theory that Li Tianlan's strength was based on murderous weapons was very popular in the Dark World. So even without the 2 legions, Snow Country would still attribute this to the power of Xianyuan Feng. And in the chaotic battle in North Sea, Xianyuan Feng's energy would inevitably be consumed quickly, or even completely exhausted. Without energy, Xianyuan Feng was just an invincible godly weapon. Naturally, Li Tianlan's state was flawed. I don't care about that. Li Tianlan shook his head. Your Highness, you just said that you will wait here for the higher-ups of Snow Empire. Lu Yin tried his best to calm down. His smile was a little stiff, and his voice was a little cautious. Yes, Li Tianlan said. That way, I can ask for more compensation from them in half a month. Because I waited for them for the whole afternoon. Situd Songyue looked at Li Tianlan in a daze. After a long while, she suddenly reached out and touched his head. Li Tianlan laughed. He might not be handsome, but his young and clean face was confident and warm when he smiled, like the sunshine in the flying snow. He silently looked at the empty and silent camp of Snow Country, and was silent for a while. Everything that happened here today would not be meaningless. All the losses of Snow Country would be counted on Wang Xiaorao. Wang Xiaoyao now controlled the dark world of Snow Country, but he only cooperated with the higher-ups of Snow Country. Perhaps he occupied a dominant position, but he was far from being able to do whatever he wanted. Half a month. Li Tianlan was going to use this half a month to end everything at present. Half a month later, he would let the whole dark world have his voice. He gently tapped on the hilt of graceful sword, and found that the general of Snow Country had hung up the phone and looked at him with a little nervous eyes. As a general of Snow Country, he obviously knew the situation of his country better than anyone else. So he collapsed on the snow with blood all over his body, and there was some despair in his eyes. The result? Li Tianlan said casually. Takov tried his best to smile. His smile was uglier than crying. He was promoted to the military rank last year, and was not from Zhongzhou State. He didn't know Li Tianlan and didn't know how to call him, so he could only skip this step and said directly, my boss said he would report this to the president. His voice was a little trembling. But, no buts. Li Tianlan shook his head. You can kneel here before the people of Snow Country come. Countless visible sword energy intertwined in front of him, and spread upward quickly. Takov's face was pale, and he subconsciously propped up his upper body. The sword energy went straight from his chest to the top of his head. He remained kneeling and was completely shrouded by the sword energy. In this case, as long as his body moved more than 5 centimeters, his whole body would be cut into countless pieces by the sword energy. Li Tianlan took a deep breath and looked at Sai City behind him. Auntie, let's go back and talk. His voice was a little deep. Okay. Situd Songyue nodded. Have you had lunch? I'll have someone prepare it. He gave Lu Yin a wink. Lu Yin nodded and quickly turned to arrange lunch. Not yet. I heard that the snow chicken here is good. I'll try it later, Li Tianlan said with a smile. Situd Songyue gently raised the corner of her mouth. Her eyebrows and eyes were curved like crescent moons, and the thin crow's feet showed at the corners of her eyes. She was extremely beautiful and kind. It's a little late. I'll cook for you next time. Okay. Li Tianlan smiled but did not move. Situd Songyue finally realized something. Her expression was a little dignified. Now you. I'm fine. Li Tianlan said softly. He stood where he was and moved his body slightly. The range of that kind of movement was too small, even smaller than a slight tremble. It seemed that he had been standing where he was. Situd Songyue's eyes were a little worried. She suddenly said, I'll carry you on my back. No need. Li Tianlan took a deep breath and suddenly took a step forward. Sizzle. In the slight sound, it seemed that something was breaking, and the liquid was squeezed out. Li Tianlan, who was expressionless, suddenly frowned. A lot of blood came out from his body in an instant. Li Tianlan's face grew paler. Blood soaked his whole body in an instant. Under the cover of the black windbreaker, Situ Tsungyue could only see a small part of his trousers stained with blood, and his chest that was not covered by the windbreaker. Ha! Li Tianlan raised the corner of his mouth, and the short syllable became a little distorted. Situ Tsungyue tightly pursed her lips. After a while, she said hoarsely, "Your body is too fragile." "This is the price of invincibility," Li Tianlan whispered. It seemed that because of the pain, his voice was a little gloomy. "But it's not unbearable." He slowly stepped forward. The blood became more and more as he moved. Li Tianlan left a very obvious bloodstain on the road he walked. And for me, such a price is not unbearable. There was no way for him to enter the invincible realm at this age. He could only take another path. Unorthodox way? Unorthodox way? Whatever it was, he was now indeed standing at the peak of personal force in the dark world. He would pay a little price. But he had the dragon vein, and his body's amazing recovery ability was enough to suppress this price to a bearable range. For Li Tianlan, as long as he could bear it, there was no price. He walked faster and faster. Wisps of dense mist gradually spread from his arms to his whole body. He walked in the snow all over the mountain, and his body became more and more blurred. At nearly 2 o'clock in the afternoon, the wounds on Li Tianlan's body had completely healed. His aura was still a little weak, but it was recovering every moment. He took a shower in the room used for entertaining guests and changed his clothes. A sumptuous lunch had been prepared in the small restaurant of Sai City. The high-level officials of Sai City gathered together and waited quietly for Li Tianlan. Situ Tsungyue introduced everyone to Li Tianlan very seriously. Cool breeze, drifting cloud, and deep dream could all be said to be acquaintances. In addition, there were 4 experts above the thunder-shocking realm in Sai City. Huiyue, a petite and silent assassin at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm. Wildfire, an assassin at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm who was born in Azura Path, but took the initiative to join Sai City. Wukong was the oldest and the first to follow Situ Tsungyue. Nowadays, he seldom went down the mountain and played the role of the butler of Sai City. The other one was not present, but Li Tianlan was most familiar with her. She was Du Hanin, who was a latecomer among the several veteran assassins of Sai City. There was also a thunder-shocking realm assassin who died in Europe more than a year ago. Now, in front of Li Tianlan was the top lineup of Sai City. Of course, Li Tianlan still remembered another name of Sai City. That was also the purpose of his coming here today. Li Tianlan shook hands with everyone, and then sat in the main seat that Situ Tsungyue intentionally or unintentionally left for him. He didn't say much and just began to eat quietly. There was no wine on the table, and no one who was good at talking, so the atmosphere was a little dull, but not solemn. Li Tianlan didn't put down his bowl and chopsticks until everyone slowed down. He looked at the crowd and said slowly, "In a short time, Snow Country won't come to apologize, but they won't continue to send troops here." No one spoke and looked at Li Tianlan attentively. Li Tianlan gently knocked on the table and said in a low and soft tone, "I have one thing that I need your help with." "Go ahead." Situ Tsungyue smiled softly. "I have no problem with going to Beihai with your highness. I believe everyone here will." Cool Breeze said with a smile, including Wukong the old guy. Wukong, whose hair was a little gray, smiled. He looked at Li Tianlan and said softly, "I can still move my old bones. If your highness needs me, just say the word. I also miss the days when I fought side by side with your highness." Deep Dream laughed and seemed to recall the time in East Island. "I have no problem." Radiant Moon and Wildfire spoke at the same time. "Not to Beihai. I can solve the problem in Beihai by myself." Li Tianlan took a deep look at them and said quietly. Situ Tsungyue raised her eyebrows and said nothing. Li Tianlan lowered his eyelids, knocked on the table and said slowly, "I hope Sai City can go to East Island." His voice was as soft as the wind, but in Situ Tsungyue's ears, It was like a clap of thunder. Her smile froze for a moment, and it seemed a little unnatural. All the people present were top assassins. They almost instantly caught the change in Situ Songyue's expression. The dining table became quiet. Li Tianlan calmly took a sip of tea and said nothing. It was certain that East Island's Jifeng Sword Raining School and Wuji Palace would participate in the final battle in Beihai. Not only the two major martial arts sects of East Island, but also Beihai, to be exact, the southern area of Beihai province. East Island was determined to get it this time. In their eyes, that was their land. So all the intelligence showed that in the special warfare system of East Island, personnel were transferred frequently, and it was clear that they intended to go all out to destroy the Wang family of Beihai. Under such circumstances, East Island was bound to be empty again. Just like in the final battle in Heaven Capital 5 years ago. The old things seemed to be reincarnated again. It was the same situation. 5 years ago, a considerable number of experts from East Island were trapped in Zhongzhou State, including 2 invincible realm grandmasters from East Island. And this time, 2 invincible realm grandmasters of East Island were about to be involved in Beihai. The only difference was that Li Tianlan was not qualified to fight for anything 5 years ago. But now 5 years later, he wanted the right to speak in the dark world of East Island. Li Tianlan was qualified to fight for anything, and any resources. Emperor Dong's palace was rooted in Tiannan, and would gradually spread to the entire Southeast Asia. Although East Island was small, it was enough to be a barrier for Emperor Dong's palace in some aspects. The 5 countries in Eastern Europe were the foundation laid by Li Tianlan. The military flag movement gave Li Tianlan a reason to intervene in Snow Country. The 5 countries in Eastern Europe gradually established contact with the Dark Knights in Northern Europe. The treason conspiracy of the Special Warfare Group could also allow Li Tianlan to gradually replace Kunlun City. Zhongzhou State, Southeast Asia, East Island, Eastern Europe, Northern Europe. Li Tianlan could fight for everything. As long as he had enough time to digest all these, Emperor Dong's palace would become the real overlord of the dark world. This was the era of Donghuang. There might be obstacles in front of Li Tianlan, but after Mormon's eternal sword, there was no insurmountable mountain in front of him. Everything he wanted was no longer a future that he could look forward to. But now was the time. If he wanted it, he would get it. East Island was determined to get Beihai. Li Tianlan was determined to get East Island. It was a race against time. So he wanted to go to Sai City. Not only Sai City, Mount Shu, which could not intervene in the final battle of Beihai, would also go there. Situ Songyue, Wei Kunlun. He wanted the only 2 invincible realm experts in Zhongzhou State to completely overturn East Island. Li Tianlan picked up the cup in front of him and drank some water. He turned his head and looked at Situ Songyue quietly. Situ Songyue said nothing. She looked at Li Tianlan with a pale face. Li Tianlan looked away. His expression grew calmer. Chapter 895. The atmosphere seemed to have dropped to a freezing point. Everyone could feel the stalemate at the dining table. Li Tianlan held the cup and tapped it thoughtfully. His expression was as calm as water, and he said nothing. Situ Songyue slightly lowered her head and also said nothing. Cool breeze and drifting cloud seemed somewhat nervous. They sat there motionlessly, not making any unnecessary movements. Deep Dream wanted to say something but stopped on second thought. In the end, she did not speak. Sai City was definitely willing to accept Li Tianlan's order, and the interior of East Island would become empty as the final battle of Beihai progressed. Sai City, Mount Shu. In today's dark world, in terms of high-end force, the combination of the 2 forces would not be weaker than any superpower in its heyday. The hidden god of Zhongzhou State, the Nirvana Sword Master. 2 invincible realm experts. Qingfeng Lu Yun, Phantom Sword Master, Yin Yang Sword Master. 4 half-step invincible realm experts. This kind of lineup was exaggerated enough at any time, and it had the ability to overturn the whole East Island to meet Li Tianlan's requirements. But the problem was that Situ Songyue didn't want to go to East Island. Not because of East Island itself. It was not because of Jifeng Sword Raining School and Wuji Palace. It was because of the purgatory of Heaven Capital. Although its strength had been shifting in the past 2 years, the purgatory of Heaven Capital still had a lot of influence in East Island. Because of Li Kuangtu of the purgatory of Heaven Capital. Or perhaps there were others. The atmosphere was getting more and more oppressive. Qing Feng forced a smile and opened his mouth. He wanted to say something. Li Tianlong glanced at him. His eyes were calm, and could even be said to be clear. However, Qing Feng suddenly lost the courage to speak and lowered his head in silence. He understood Li Tianlong's eyes. So calm, so determined. All he wanted was an answer. There was no need for a reason. To East Island. Situd Songyue finally spoke. Her face was a little pale. And her smile was a little forced, but her voice was still gentle. How far do you want to go? Li Tianlong tapped the glass in his hand with his fingers. Quiet and indifferent. Those who obey me shall prosper. Those who oppose me shall perish. With a calm voice, he gave his answer. An answer that left no room for discussion. Situd Songyue's body shook slightly and she said in a low voice, including, nothing. Li Tianlong interrupted her and said softly, I just want what I want, that's all. That was all. Nothing was included, which meant that everything was included. What he wanted was East Island. So everything in East Island was no different to Li Tianlong. Wuji Palace, Jifeng Sword Raining School, Purgatory of Heaven Capital, all the dark forces. Those who obey me will prosper. Those who oppose me will perish. Situd Songyue suddenly stood up. She glanced at Li Tianlong. Li Tianlong looked up at her, his eyes clear and soft. Come with me. Situd Songyue suddenly said and walked out of the restaurant. She walked quietly in front, down the stairs and out the door. In front of him was still the same unchanging snowstorm, vast and boundless. Situd Songyue walked quietly. She was in a trance. Li Tianlong followed her, silent and indifferent. The wind and snow fluttered the black cloak he was wearing, and the long hem of the cloak floated gently in the wind and snow. The complicated and dense golden patterns on the cloak formed mysterious patterns one after another in the transformation of the cloak. Li Tianlong stood straight, exuding an extremely sharp majesty. What if I refuse? Situd Songyue suddenly whispered. Li Tianlong didn't seem surprised. He just nodded and said, I can understand. What if I refuse? Situd Songyue asked again in a faint tone. Then Mount Shu will go by itself, and Saint will lead the team. Li Tianlong said. Situd Songyue smiled and kept walking. She repeated again, what if I refuse? Li Tianlong was silent for a while, chuckled, and repeated his first answer. I can understand, he said. Those who obey me will prosper, and those who oppose me will perish? Situd Songyue laughed. How could it be? Li Tianlong couldn't help laughing. I respect your choice. If Sai City refuses, I will go down the mountain. No one will perish. Sai City will always be a friend of Emperor Dong's palace. You are not included. He couldn't forget what Sai City had done for him, so he really understood. He didn't mind Situd Songyue refusing his request, but he would regret it. If he left Sai City today and returned without accomplishing anything, then it seemed that Sai City was destined to go on a completely different path from Emperor Dong's palace. They are not included. Situd Songyue's voice was low. Li Tianlong looked at Situd Songyue with a smile and said softly, really? Isn't it? Situd Songyue looked at Li Tianlong with sharp eyes. Li Tianlong was silent for a while and said lightly, I haven't thought about this, and it's not what I should think about. Before my grandfather died, he handed the Li family to me. Different people may have different answers, but in my eyes, the Li family is my Li family, and I don't accept betrayal. That's not betrayal. Situd Songyue's voice was a little excited. That's your answer. Li Tianlong said softly. In my eyes, it's betrayal. Including Li Kuangtu. Including the old man standing next to Li Kuangtu. Many people betrayal. In Li Tianlong's eyes, they were betrayers. In their eyes, Li Tianlong might also be a betrayal. They were the same. I can accept different ideas just like Sai City now. Auntie, I won't blame you whether you help me or not, but I won't accept betrayal. He looked at Situd Songyue and whispered, I'm here to confirm one thing. Situt Songyue bit her lip and did not speak. Li Tianlan's voice became somewhat cold. The Heavenly Parish Palace. Whose Heavenly Parish Palace is it? Many years ago, after the collapse of the Li family, Li Honghe gave up everything on the surface. It had gathered most of the Li family's power, and allowed the Li family to complete nirvana after a long period of dormancy. Countless elders of the Li family left the cage of the Li family, left Zhongzhou state, and formed a new organization. That was the prototype of the purgatory of heaven capital. In other words, it was the new Li family. It was the purgatory of heaven capital that Li Honghe planned to leave to Li Tianlan, and the brand new Li family that Li Tianlan planned to leave to Li Tianlan. Sunluo Hall, Long Life Hall, and Athanasi Hall became the main combat forces of the purgatory of heaven capital. They were also the powerful armed forces of the purgatory of heaven capital to deter all forces. But this was not the complete purgatory of heaven capital. The complete purgatory of heaven capital had 5 departments: limitless longevity, undying, heaven's net, heaven's fall. Tianluo was in charge of intelligence. Meteorite was a knife hidden in the dark, a killing knife. This saber also had another name, Sai City of Zhongzhou State. Sai City had always been the most important department of the purgatory of heaven capital, and the Li family. Li Tianlan thought that the Li family was his own. But heavenly fall, was it his heavenly fall or Li Guangtu's heavenly fall? In the wind and snow, Situt Songyue's face became paler. Li Tianlan's question left her with no room to avoid it. Sai City could be a pure Sai City. It could be Li Tianlan's heavenly meteor. Li Tianlan wouldn't mind. But if she chose Li Guangtu, she would be the enemy of Emperor Dong's palace. She didn't want to be Li Tianlan's enemy or leave the Li family, so she had to go to East Island. Overturn everything in East Island with the attitude of those who obey me will prosper, and those who oppose me will perish. He overturned Wuji Palace, Jifeng Sword Raining School, and everything in the purgatory of heaven capital. Break everything that belonged to the purgatory of heaven capital, and turn it into something that belonged to Li Tianlan. This was tantamount to becoming enemies with Li Guangtu. Li Guangtu was her man. I used to be. But he was also the only man she had intimate contact with in her life. You will kill him. Situt Songyue lowered her eyebrows and whispered. Li Tianlan knew who she was referring to. After a long silence, he thought of Li Honghe. Shaking his head slightly, he whispered, probably not. He said probably. Situt Songyue also thought of Li Honghe. Perhaps until now, Li Guangtu didn't understand that her meeting with him was not an accident. It came from an old man's arrangement. The very first arrangement. Situt Songyue laughed. Her vision was a little blurry. She lowered her head slightly and whispered, Sai City will go to East Island. After a pause, she gave the clearest answer. Heavenly Meteor Palace will go to East Island. Li Tianlan looked at her silently. His eyes were no longer looking at an elder, but looking at an important part of his power map soberly and rationally. He would give her the greatest trust, and also give her the most solemn promise. Li Tianlan nodded. His voice shook the wind and snow. There is a place for you in my dynasty. Yes. Situt Songyue lowered her head. Her voice was sad and a little dazed, but it was extremely clear. Your Majesty. Chapter 896. When she opened her eyes, the room was gloomy and gloomy. The clock on the wall was ticking. She moved and looked at the time. For a moment, she couldn't tell whether it was day or night. The curtains were closed, there was no sunlight outside, and it was quiet around. Bai Yuming sat up, put on her slippers, opened the curtains, and saw the vast snow outside. It seemed to be afternoon. It was going to be dark. She shook her head with difficulty and subconsciously touched the wounds on her body. The feeling of weakness was still there, and her whole body was soft. Her ears seemed to be still echoing the raging artillery fire. All kinds of weapons shone in different colors and roared unscrupulously in the desert under the night sky. The earth-shattering sound seemed to have been imprinted in the depths of her heart. It was the explosion, the blood, and the flying yellow sand. Bai Yuming stood by the window and looked out. The surroundings were quiet and warm. Outside the window was flying snowflakes. Yesterday, today. What she thought and what she saw seemed to be two completely different worlds. She stood on the edge of the world, and her whole person had a sense of being torn apart. Her spirit was not tense, but she still did not completely relax. Chaotic memories kept rolling. She remembered that she helped Li Tianlan clean up the bodies of the dead in the desert. She remembered that she flew to Suzhou with the helicopter from Suzhou. She did not return to Tiannan in Suzhou, but returned to Yuzhou. Home. Bai Yuming was at a loss for a long time before she realized that she was at home in her room. No matter what the outcome of last night's war was, it was over. She touched the wounds on her body. Countless wounds, big and small, had healed and formed scabs. The Dongqing clan and the Bai family naturally had a way to remove scars. Her injury was not too serious, and there was no serious problem on the surface of her body. The internal injury still needed to rest for a period of time. The main thing was the weakness brought by mental exhaustion and severe exhaustion, which made her weak. There was also the sequela brought by the Taoist madness. The Taoist madness, she thought of Azura Path. She thought of her commander. Her knife pierced into his chest. They said goodbye. Said goodbye? Bai Yuming was silent for a long time. It was hard for her to describe her psychological feelings. It was a little low, but not heart-wrenching. She was muddle-headed. That knife seemed to have merged with every picture of the Desert War. Perhaps it was a little special, but they were indeed fused together. Bai Yuming grabbed her hair. She had liked him before. In the past, she shook her head again and drank the recovery potion on the bedside table. She changed out of her pajamas and put on some loose clothes before walking out of her room. A burst of hearty laughter came from downstairs. It sounded familiar. Bai Yuming stood on the railing of the corridor and looked down, slightly stunned. On the sofa in the living room downstairs, a man in his 30s was watching. The calm and composed man sat there, talking happily with his grandfather Bai Zhanfang. Although he was a junior, he showed no fear and trepidation in the face of the most senior counselor in Zhongzhou State. His every move was free and easy, and his momentum was magnificent. Bai Zhanfang sat opposite him with a smile. His face was ruddy and he seemed to be in a good mood. Bai Yuming blinked her eyes and forced herself to wake up from her muddle-headed state. She adjusted her mood and chuckled. Brother-in-law, long time no see. What a rare guest. I thought the speaker had forgotten where the Bai family is. Bai Zhanfang raised his head and glanced at his granddaughter, smiling without saying a word. Opposite him, Zhou Yuanshan, who was now the speaker of Jiangxia, raised his head and glared at Bai Yuming. He scolded with a smile. How dare you call me brother-in-law? Every time you open your mouth, you call me brother-in-law. I think you've forgotten about me, your brother. I am 1 year older than Qiuqi. Qiuqi has always called me sister. It's right to call you brother-in-law. Bai Yuming raised the corner of her mouth and sped up her pace to go downstairs. Zhou Yuanshan shook his head, not knowing whether to laugh or cry. In this generation of the three pillars of the giant group, he, Bai Yuming, and Dongqing Qiuqi were close in age. They could be said to be childhood friends. He was 4 years older than Dongqing Qiuqi, and Bai Yuming was 1 year older than Dongqing Qiuqi. In this way, Bai Yuming, who called Zhou Yuanshan brother since childhood, always regarded herself as sister after they got married. When they got married, if Zhou Yuanshan didn't call her sister, he almost couldn't get into the bridal chamber. It was a dark history with no moral integrity. Now, every time he met Bai Yuming, she called him brother-in-law, which made his scalp numb. Bai Yuming went downstairs and poured herself a glass of water. She sat on the sofa casually and looked at Zhou Yuanshan. Are you here for a meeting? 3 months at the political college. Zhou Yuanshan smiled. It was an exception for him to serve as the speaker of Jiangxia. Letting Dongqing Qiuqi serve as the governor of Jiangxia was the first in history. The speaker and the governor of a province were husband and wife. This was not only unprecedented, but also unprecedented. Dongqing Qiuqi received the admission notice from the political college soon after she took office. Now she had just returned to Jiangxia. With the gradual improvement of the situation, especially the stability of Jiangxia, Zhou Yuanshan naturally couldn't avoid this process. Political college TUT, advanced course? Is the speaker going to become a member of parliament? Bai Yuming smiled. Zhou Yuanshan picked up a pillow and threw it at her. Bai Yuming took the pillow and held it in her arms. You are more optimistic than me. Zhou Yuanshan shook his head. Training course. The study in the political college was generally divided into advanced course and training course. Entering the advanced course basically meant that the officials were going to be promoted or had been promoted, and the latter meant to recharge. Of course, in some special periods, there would be other good or bad interpretations. Zhou Yuanshan's qualifications were indeed shallow when compared with the position of governor, especially the speaker. The training course at the level of governor was barely gilded. Oh, Bai Yuming answered, holding the pillow and saying nothing. She forced herself to behave normally, but she was extremely tired both mentally and mentally. Sitting on the sofa, her eyes were a little dull. She found that she hadn't slept enough. Didn't have a good rest? Bai Zhanfang glanced at her and asked with a smile. It's mainly because I'm not used to it. Bai Yuming shook her head silently. From the battlefield to home, I still need to take a rest. Is the injury serious? Zhou Yuanshan asked. The injury is not serious, but I feel very tired. Bai Yuming shook her head. Tired? Bai Zhanfang and Zhou Yuanshan fell silent at the same time. More than 1,000 victims in Emperor Dong's palace. And Yang Xiaoxiong who died in the hands of Bai Yuming. These were all reasons that made Bai Yuming feel tired. Zhou Yuanshan thought for a moment, and smiled reluctantly. Qiuqi should be on the plane now. I arranged for the secretary to pick her up. After dinner, let her talk with you. Maybe you will feel better. Bai Yuming blinked her eyes, showed a smile, and said yes. She and Dongqing Qiuqi hadn't seen each other for a while. If Bai Zhanfang frowned. If you really feel tired, take a break for a while, he said softly. Don't go to Tiannan during this time. Stay at home with me. Well, Tianlan will come in the evening. You tell him. Tianlan is coming? Bai Yuming was a little surprised. Family dinner. Everyone will come. Your grandpa Dongqing will also come. Bai Zhanfang chuckled. What happened? Looking at her grandpa's glowing face, Bai Yuming was a little expectant. Good news. Bai Zhanfang couldn't hide his smile. It's all good news. The door of the villa was pushed open. A graceful and beautiful figure walked into the villa. Before seeing Bai Zhanfang, she had already laughed cheerfully. Dad, I'm back. She took off her coat and walked into the living room. Zhou Yuanshan had already stood up at the first time and called her mom. Bai Qingqian smiled and waved her hand to let Zhou Yuanshan sit down. She sat next to Bai Yuming, reached out to touch her head and asked softly, How is your injury? Bai Yuming held a pillow, slowly leaned against Bai Qingqian's arms, and shook her head. Bai Qingqian quietly held her niece and didn't speak for a while. Chapter 897. At 5 o'clock in the afternoon. In Yuzhou, in front of a luxury jewelry counter in the Oriental Mall, Qin Weibai gently turned her white and soft wrist. Looking at the green jade bracelet on her wrist, she chuckled and said, Does it look good? It's very beautiful, ma'am. This jade rabbit matches your temperament perfectly. It suits you very well. I have to say, your taste. The professionally trained shopping guide praised sincerely. But before she finished speaking, Qin Weibai interrupted her with a smile. This is a gift I prepared for the elders. The shopping guide's smile stiffened, and she wanted to smooth things over awkwardly. Qin Weibai had already turned to look at Horsewoman beside her. What do you think? Boss, we have more than 25% of the Posey family shares. Horsewoman helped Qin Weibai hold her coat with one hand and a small gift bag in the other. Her expression was meticulous. The Posey family was a famous family in Europe. To be exact, they were the first jeweler in Europe. If Qin Weibai needed jewelry, she could ask them to customize it. It's too late to prepare. Qin Weibai shook her head, took off the bracelet on her hand, and whispered with a smile. It's just a token of my appreciation for our first formal meeting. You don't need to be too deliberate. She nodded to the shopping guide. Wrap it up. Horsewoman immediately handed a bank card without a password to the shopping guide. The exquisite bag in her hand had already been filled with many small gifts. They were indeed small gifts. At least, they were not big. For example, there were scarves, watches, jewelry, and about a dozen pieces scattered around. They were the trophies they had obtained during the afternoon shopping. The shopping guide took the bank card with both hands and trotted to pay the bill. Qin Weibai looked down at the jewelry in the counter casually. She blinked her eyes, thinking about what she seemed to have overlooked. Horsewoman held the gift and looked at the relaxed and quiet boss. She could not help but have a strange feeling in her heart. In her impression, this was not the style of the boss at all. She wore a white close-fitting cardigan, black tight straight pants and high heels. The light-colored coat had been handed over to Horsewoman. Her always simple and light dressing style fully displayed her tall and slender figure. Qin Weibai's figure was not an exaggerated shape, but a kind of softness and delicacy that made people feel very comfortable at first sight. The more comfortable it was, the more it became. For some unknown reason, she wore a mask when she went out, covering half of her face. However, her cold and elegant temperament and dreamy bright eyes still attracted countless stunned gazes. Languid, leisurely, gentle, elegant, with a hint of reserved arrogance. She looked carefree and charming. This was a standard state similar to that of a rich lady, but it was not the state that the knight remembered. In her mind, her boss was like a statue of a god. She stood tall, strict, sharp, intelligent, and cold. She never seemed to be in a leisurely state, nor was there the slightest bit of laziness. She always kept herself in the calmest state of mind, thinking about everything and observing everything. She was like a statue of a god that could not be desecrated, but also like a god that could control everything. Perhaps she would become something else. But it was really hard for the knight to imagine that she would become a young housewife. The knight lowered his head and remained silent. Her eyes, which had always been arrogant and aggressive, suddenly dimmed. "What are you thinking about?" An emotionless voice suddenly rang out. Knight was shocked and shook her head subconsciously. Her voice was slightly hoarse. "No, nothing." Qin Weibai stared at her eyes and did not speak. The state that made the knight very familiar seemed to be recovering in Qin Weibai, but it did not make her feel intimate. Knight subconsciously averted his gaze. "You feel uncomfortable." Qin Weibai sat on the high chair and casually looked at the jewelry in the window. Her tone was very sure. Knight bit her lip and did not speak. At that moment, she did feel uncomfortable. Very, very uncomfortable. "Speak," Qin Weibai said. "I want to go back to Switzerland." Knight hesitated and said in a low voice. Qin Weibai was silent. She thought for a moment and said lightly, "You are very dissatisfied with me." Knight hesitated and shook his head. He tried to choose his words, trying not to say some words that might irritate Qin Weibai. He said softly, "I just feel that the current situation is not easy to come by. Such a situation is not for us to enjoy life. We can do more." Everything the palace master did was to make Emperor Dong's palace really rise. Now the rising state of Emperor Dong's palace was unstoppable. 2 years. After a period of silence, Li Tianlan had a real invincible momentum. What happened in Sai City today had spread throughout the dark world in the shortest time. Li Tianlan might have his own plan, but his actions were regarded as a show of force by countless people. Such a show of force was naturally extremely powerful, enough to deter most people in the dark world, and even affect the alliance of the major forces against Beihai. Haoyue group had an accident, and there were faint cracks in the Prince group. The suspected treason of the leader of the Special Warfare Group was brewing little by little. The storm was treacherous, and the undercurrent was surging. Almost all the situations were favorable to Emperor Dong's palace. In Knight's view, everything around was full of opportunities. No matter what she did, Qin Weibai should not be in such a state. "I have done what I should do." Qin Weibai was silent for a moment and shook her head. In the current situation, it is best to do nothing for the next period of time. During this period of time, Knight asked in a low voice. "After military counselor's operation has a clear result," Qin Weibai said faintly, "you have too many questions." Knight was silent and finally stopped talking. "Go get the car," Qin Weibai said. "Tianlan has come back. Let's pick him up and then go to the Bai family's manor." At 5:30, the sky in Yuzhou had completely darkened. Under the light, the snowflakes in the air became more and more wanton. Dongqing Wudi buttoned up his coat and walked out of the conference room of the Hidden Dragon Sea with a solemn face. Without talking to anyone, he got into his car. One by one, the directors walked out one after another. The cars parked in front of the conference room left one by one. Dongqing Wudi sat in the back row, leaned against the back of the chair, and let out a long breath. Let's go home. How's it going? The car started slowly. Bai Qingzhao, the Deputy Secretary General of the Army Headquarters who personally acted as the driver, asked with a smile. It's hard to say, Dongqing Wudi said slowly, but your matter should be settled. Bai Qingzhao was stunned. His matter? Now his biggest demand was to remove the word deputy from the title of Deputy Secretary General in tomorrow's general election, become the Secretary General of the Army Headquarters, and then enter the Parliament of Zhongzhou State and become one of its members. This was also a relatively important goal of the giant group, and its importance was even second to Dongqing Wudi's re-election next year. This was also something without much suspense. Next year, Bai Zhanfang would definitely retire. He would step down as the Speaker of Yuzhou. Even if it was out of an exchange of interests, Bai Qingzhao could replace him. He shook his head and said gloomily, "This is not a gain." Of course it is, and it's a big gain. Dongqing Wudi smiled, looked at the snowflakes outside the window, and recalled the content of the meeting. Too many things had happened today. First, the chairman of Haoyue Group died. This matter attracted everyone's attention at once. Then, before anyone could react, the task force and the General Staff Department submitted reports about the Burning Legion. The most critical witness was killed as soon as he entered the Special Operations Bureau of Yuzhou. The image of the entire Special Warfare Group's treason suddenly became extremely clear. Li Huaqing held a meeting as soon as possible. It was not a plenary meeting of the parliament. It was a meeting of the 9 directors. The 9 directors could be said to be the leaders of the major groups in Zhongzhou State. Obviously, Li Huaqing wanted to control the scope of influence when the situation was unclear. In addition to the 9 directors, Gu Xingyun and Yi Dongsheng, the deputy minister of the army headquarters who first discovered the suspicion of the Special Warfare Group's treason. There was no one else in this meeting. At the beginning of the meeting, Yi Dongsheng had already submitted a report on behalf of the General Staff Department. The conclusion reluctantly given by the task force at the first time was regarded as a formal conclusion. In the conclusion, it was already confirmed that Qi Mulin was seriously suspected of treason. 2 years ago, Li Tianlan destroyed the Qi family was just an overreaction, but it could not be regarded as a crime. On the contrary, his approach saved a lot of losses for Zhongzhou State. Li Tianlan was not guilty. This was the first point that the Southeast Group and the Giant Group wanted to confirm. It seemed unimportant, but in fact, it was very important. Li Tianlan was not guilty, so the 2 years of imprisonment in the desert was Li Tianlan's grievance. Zhongzhou State must compensate him. Li Tianlan leaving the desert could not be regarded as a prison break. At the same time, some people who asked for severe punishment of Li Tianlan had to pay some price, and those who supported Li Tianlan would also get benefits. What Li Tianlan did next was bound to be highly tolerated by Zhongzhou State. Li Tianlan was not guilty, so Qi Mulin was guilty. Qi Mulin was Qi Baitsong's adopted son. If something happened to him, Qi Baitsong's reputation would inevitably be fatally damaged. In addition, Black Hawk's confession, the whole Special Warfare Group would be in a precarious situation. At the meeting, Gu Xingyun made a speech that lasted nearly 40 minutes. After the necessary review, he denied all the contents of the confession and said that he did not know the cause of Black Hawk's death. At the same time, he stated that the Special Warfare Group would cooperate with all the subsequent investigations of the parliament. The Special Warfare Group and the Prince Group were closely connected. At the same time, they thought that confirming Li Tianlan's innocence should not be too hasty. When the parliament was in a heated debate, the news of Sai City came from the outside world. That incredible sword seemed to completely dispel the spirit of the Special Warfare Group. Gu Xingyun was the first to fall silent. The Giant Group and the Southeast Group echoed each other and confirmed Li Tianlan's innocence at the top meeting of Zhongzhou State. Li Huaqing acquiesced in this and emphasized that he would communicate with Li Tianlan and give Emperor Dong's palace adequate compensation appropriately. A task force was also formally set up at the meeting. Dongqing Wudi served as the patriarch, and Yi Dongxing served as the deputy team leader. They transferred real elites from the General Staff Headquarters, the Ministry of Security, and other departments to investigate the Burning Legion and the Special Warfare Group in detail. A lot of things were determined in the nearly 3-hour meeting. Bai Qingzhao's position was naturally determined. It could be seen as a compromise of the Special Warfare Group, or Gu Xingyun's concession in silence. Even without this, I won't have a big problem next year, Bai Qingzhao said in a dull voice. Normally speaking, it's true, Dongqing Wudi said thoughtfully, but now there are some unexpected situations. Bai Qingzhao said, and his eyes became a little fierce. It's not a bad thing. Dongqing Wudi shook his head. A few days ago, I communicated with Saint and military counselor. They seemed to want Qingqian to go further, but they didn't say it clearly. Tonight, Tianlan should talk to me about this. Bai Zhanfang retired. Under normal circumstances, Bai Qingzhao or Bai Qingqian could at most be promoted. Now this opportunity was very likely to let both brother and sister go further. Dongqing Wudi was silent for a while, then said with a smile, "Let's go home first. There will be hot pot in the evening, and the children will all go there." Bai Qingzhao breathed a sigh of relief and started the car with a smile. At 6 o'clock, the Rolls-Royce with the Yuzhou license plate slowly drove into the Bai family's manor. The back of the car had been isolated. Qin Weibai's face was slightly red. She curled her legs in Li Tianlan's arms and moved. She whispered, "Let me go. We're almost there." "Doesn't it hurt anymore?" Li Tianlan chuckled and carelessly played with a pair of translucent and tender jade feet in his palm, as if he was touching the most precious treasure. Qin Weibai rolled her eyes at Li Tianlan. Her eyes were like silk, and she said with hatred, "It doesn't hurt at all. You only know how to bully me." She put in a little effort to stretch her feet out of Li Tianlan's arms, bent down to find her socks, and carefully put them on. She whispered with a smile, "You're going too far." Li Tianlan smiled, and was about to say something when a bright light suddenly shone from another direction. It was an Audi with a Jiangxia license plate. The car of the Jiangxia resident office in Beijing. Qin Weibai whispered, "Is it Speaker Zhou? Or Qiuqi?" Li Tianlan shook his head. The Rolls-Royce and the Audi stopped in front of the Bai family's villa almost at the same time. An elegant and dignified figure came out of the back row of the Audi. She looked at the Rolls-Royce beside her, and seemed to wave in surprise. "Sister Qiuqi." Li Tianlan got out of the car, and looked at the woman beside the Audi. He was slightly stunned. Dongqing Qiuqi stood there, beautiful and dignified. In the flying snow, she was dressed warmly and held a tightly wrapped object in her arms. An object? Li Tianlan was a little stunned. In his sight, the small object moved slightly. "My daughter." Dongqing Qiuqi greeted Qin Weibai with a smile and looked at Li Tianlan, who was a little stunned. "When did it happen?" Li Tianlan laughed. He had been in the desert for 2 years, but he really hadn't heard of it. "A few months ago." Dongqing Qiuqi smiled softly. "The child is only 6 months old and can't greet people yet, but we can't do without a greeting gift." Li Tianlan smiled and said yes. He looked at the baby in Dongqing Qiuqi's arms curiously. "What's her name?" "Let's go inside." Dongqing Qiuqi smiled and walked to the villa. She whispered, "Dongqing Yu." Chapter 898. The villa and the manor of the Bai family ushered in a rare lively atmosphere. In fact, there were not too many people in the so-called lively atmosphere. Dongqing Hongguang specially came from Zhongyuan province. Dongqing Wudi and Bai Qingqian were husband and wife. Bai Zhanfang, Bai Qingzhao, Bai Yuming, and their grandchildren. Zhou Yuanshan and Dongqing Qiuqi took their daughter. Then came Li Tianlan and Qin Weibai. This was the family dinner of the Bai family. They were all people Li Tianlan was familiar with. Bai Yuming, Zhou Yuanshan, and Dongqing Qiuqi could be said to be the most important people for him now or in the future. Even though Bai Zhanfang and Bai Qingzhao rarely met Li Tianlan, they had tried their best to help Li Tianlan more than once. But Li Tianlan was not used to this atmosphere. although everyone behaved naturally at the dining table. And there was no deliberate element in this kind of naturalness. It was as if they naturally regarded Li Tianlan as their family. But Li Tianlan knew very well that he was not their family, at least not on the surface. On the surface, he was Dongqing Wudi's son-in-law. His fiancée was still in a coma in Tiannan recovering from her injuries. As the son-in-law, Li Tianlan took Qin Weibai to the Bai family dinner. No matter how you looked at it, it was a very strange thing. But whether it was Dongqing Wudi, Bai Qingqian or even Qin Weibai, they did not show the slightest embarrassment. She naturally gave the gifts that she had prepared all afternoon to everyone present. At the dinner table, she was quiet and soft. She called Dongqing Wudi minister, Bai Qingqian aunt, and naturally called Dongqing Hongguang grandpa. Dongqing Hongguang smiled so much that his eyes narrowed. The strange feeling in Li Tianlan's heart became clearer and clearer. It even showed a little. After dinner, he could only focus most of his attention on Dongqing Yu, who was 6 months old. The little girl was very beautiful and quiet. Lying in the stroller, she opened her big black eyes and gently bit her fingers. Li Tianlan found that he seemed to have never been in contact with such a small baby. In the Li family, he was the youngest. After leaving the Li family, it was the first time in the past few years that he had experienced such a scene. Her little body twisted from time to time, and made a tender voice. All of this was so fragile in Li Tianlan's eyes that he could not help but want to protect her. Do you like children? Bai Qingqian sat beside Li Tianlan and smiled. When will little Bai have a baby? Qin Weibai, who seemed to have perfectly integrated into the manner of the Bai family, took out a plate of fruit from the kitchen. Hearing Bai Qingqian's words, she blushed slightly and glanced at Li Tianlan without saying a word. There's no rush. Li Tianlan was even more embarrassed. He hurriedly changed the topic. Why Dongqing Yu? Doesn't it sound nice? Dongqing Qiuqi walked over with a smile, stretched out a finger, and gently touched the girl's delicate face. Nice. Li Tianlan looked at Zhou Yuanshan with some doubts. Brother-in-law, you don't mind? Normally, the child should be surnamed Zhou. We've discussed it. If the first one is a daughter, her surname will be Dongqing. Your brother-in-law and I are ready to have a boy to inherit the glory of the Zhou family. Dongqing Qiuqi said with a smile, looking at her daughter with doting and gentle eyes. Li Tianlan smiled and nodded. He glanced at Zhou Yuanshan and said, Congratulations, brother-in-law. The meaning of this congratulation was extremely rich. It was to congratulate Zhou Yuanshan for becoming the speaker of Jiangxia, and also for becoming a father. Zhou Yuanshan was the speaker of Jiangxia, and Dongqing Qiuqi was the governor. It was no exaggeration to say that today Zhou Yuanshan could be said to be the most authoritative speaker in the whole Zhongzhou state. His words carried enormous weight, and there would not even be a second voice in Jiangxia. With such a powerful environment, as long as it was well managed, 5 years later, when Zhou Yuanshan was in his early 40s, he was fully capable of competing for the position of a member of parliament. Even if it was an alternate member of parliament, it had extraordinary significance for him. At that time, Zhou Yuanshan could be said to have a truly promising future. Same to you. Zhou Yuanshan smiled and waved his hand. Dongqing Hongguang looked at this scene with a smile, looked at Bai Zhanfang, and nodded slightly. Bai Zhanfang stood up with a smile and said slowly, Let's go to the study to talk. Okay, I'll make you tea. Dongqing Qiuqi laughed. She didn't move, but Dongqing Yu, who was lying in the stroller, seemed to be a little bored. She twisted her body and cried. I'll go. Qin Weibai stood up, looked at Li Tianlan, who also stood up, and whispered, Don't smoke so much. Li Tianlan reached out to touch his hair, and walked to the study. Dongqing Hongguang and Bai Zhanfang. Dongqing Wudi and his wife. Li Tianlan and Zhou Yuanshan went upstairs one after another. The study was filled with incense that could refresh one's mind. Dongqing Hongguang sat on the sofa, and his smile gradually faded. He glanced at Dongqing Wudi and went straight to the point. Tell me about it. Dongqing Wudi sat next to Bai Qingqian, thought for a moment and said with certainty, The matter of the Qing dynasty is basically settled. It's not a big problem. The parliament has set up a task force to investigate the special warfare group. There is not much content in today's meeting. Everything is very sudden, and it has just begun. Everyone is still waiting for a relatively clear result. This is a good beginning, and the entry point is very good. Has the Southeast Group prepared for it? Bai Zhanfang said thoughtfully. It was prepared 2 years ago. Dong Chengwudi nodded. Black Hawk is a member of the Wang family of Beihai. To be exact, he is a man of sacrifice secretly cultivated by the Wang family of Beihai. The Wang family of Beihai has the divine martial army in Africa, and their influence is very strong. At the beginning of the rise of the Burning Legion, the Wang family of Beihai and the divine martial army have begun to secretly infiltrate the Burning Legion. Over the years, the Burning Legion has secretly cleaned up some of them, but some of them have also taken root in the Burning Legion. Black Hawk is one of them. When Tianlan entered the desert prison, the Wang family of Beihai had full confidence to let him out. So behind the Burning Legion is indeed Kunlun City. Dongqing Hongguang snorted coldly. I'm sure, but there is no evidence at present. Dongqing Wudi shook his head. The pawns of the Wang family of Beihai can't get the evidence of Kunlun City's direct communication with Ramelun. In fact, most of the confessions today are forged, and only some of them are true, such as the original retreat route of the Burning Legion, and the contact with those people when they lurked in Yuzhou. These are just some clues. They can pull some people of the Special Warfare Group down, but it's difficult to completely implicate Gu Xingyun. At least it's a good start. Zhou Yuanshan said softly. Bai Zhanfang smiled, glanced at Li Tianlan and said softly, Tianlan, what are you going to do next? Start with Haoyue Group and Donghai Investment Group. Li Tianlan's voice was calm. Donghai Investment Group was a large state-owned investment group controlled by Chen Lijuan, Chen Fangqing's daughter. There might be more articles in it than in Haoyue Group. His current goal was to target the Prince Group and Chen Fangqing. As for the treason case of the Special Warfare Group initiated by the Wang family of Beihai, a large part of the reason was to clear Li Tianlan's name. As for whether Wang Shengxiao wanted to get some benefits from the Special Warfare Group, Li Tianlan didn't care. As long as Bai Zhaoqing was promoted with this incident, Li Tianlan would be satisfied. His target would always be Chen Fangqing. Haoyue Group. Bai Qingqian thought for a moment. I worked with them when I was in Qinzhou. They handled many projects very cleanly. It can be seen that their chairman is a very cautious person. It doesn't make sense. Li Tianlan said softly. The Flourishing Age Fund has acquired more than 20% of the shares of Haoyue Group. It is expected that it can acquire 45% of the shares of Haoyue Group within a week, and become the largest shareholder of Haoyue Group. If we are lucky, more than 51% of the shares of Haoyue Group will be acquired by the Flourishing Age Fund. At that time, with absolute control, we can find out the problem internally. Bai Qingqian froze for a moment. Everyone froze for a moment. The Flourishing Age Fund? No one was unfamiliar with the Flourishing Age Fund. It was the world's top financial giant, a financial giant that could directly mobilize trillions of funds. No matter which country it was in, it could be said to be a big shot standing at the top. If it wanted, the Flourishing Age Fund even had the power to influence the development trajectory of Zhongzhou State. Less than a day after the accident of Haoyue Group, the Flourishing Age Fund had completed the initial acquisition and held 20% of the shares of Haoyue Group. In the next week, there was bound to be a bloody storm inside Haoyue Group. The financial giant, the Flourishing Age Fund, could completely swallow the entire Haoyue Group if it opened its mouth. The problem was that the Flourishing Age Fund had acquired Haoyue Group. Why did it let Li Tianlan find out the problem internally? The Flourishing Age Fund, Han Donglu, was the most powerful financier in Asia, a well-known philanthropist in Zhongzhou State, a super-rich man who had a close relationship with countless important figures in Zhongzhou State, and whose tentacles went deep into the 6 groups in Zhongzhou State. Dongqing Hongguang narrowed his eyes and looked at Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan nodded. Let me reintroduce myself. Han Donglu of the Flourishing Age Fund, codename Military Counselor. His voice was calm. So strictly speaking, the Flourishing Age Fund is now my property. Divine Emperor of 9 Heavens. Chapter 899. The study fell into an absolute silence for a moment. Li Tianlan's voice was very soft, but it had an absolutely powerful impact, which almost broke everyone's normal emotions in an instant. The speaker of the province, the director of Zhongzhou State, the member of Zhongzhou State. No matter how knowledgeable they were, it was hard to accept this fact in a short time. The Flourishing Age Fund, Han Donglu. The code name was Military Counselor. The Flourishing Age Fund was the property of Samsara Palace. Until now, the Flourishing Age Fund was Li Tianlan's property? What did this mean? Dongqing Wudi, who had been silent for a full minute, finally came to his senses. He took a deep breath subconsciously, and didn't know what it meant for a moment. The Flourishing Age Fund. Emperor Dong's Palace. Han Donglu. Li Tianlan. Dongqing Wudi's eyes became a little confused. By Zhanfang, by Qingqian, Zhou Yuanshan. Everyone was a little confused. The Flourishing Age Fund didn't exist for a long time. About a decade ago, they grew rapidly and expanded at an incredible speed. They could be seen in every huge financial storm in the world. They became the planners from the very beginning. Star State, Europe, East Island, Southeast Asia, Snow Country. The financial crises were real bloody storms and whales everywhere. The Flourishing Age Fund seemed to be a prophet, and its dangerous operations reaped miraculous returns. To this day, no one knew how crazy the Flourishing Age Fund was making money. Everyone only saw that their strength was becoming stronger and stronger at an unimaginable speed. Now it had become one of the largest hedge funds in the world. Dongqing Wudi blinked his eyes and tried to digest the explosive news. Li Tianlan had no foreshadowing before, so the news was really unexpected to them, and they were not mentally prepared at all. The Flourishing Age Fund was Li Tianlan's property. First of all, it meant that Li Tianlan and even the entire Emperor Dong's palace would never be short of money in the future. Even if Li Tianlan lost control of the 5 countries in Eastern Europe, the Flourishing Age Fund could easily support the development of the entire Emperor Dong's palace, not to mention the 5 countries in Eastern Europe that were making a lot of money every day. Well, it was easy. Dongqing Wudi was silent for a while and shook his head. It was really easy. Secondly, Li Tianlan had invisibly become a partner of a large number of international giants. In this way, Emperor Dong's palace would have no lack of investment in the future. Once this news was exposed, Emperor Dong's palace, which had been developing at a crazy speed, would further develop faster. The power of money would radiate throughout Tiannan, and shorten the time for Li Tianlan to unify Tiannan. And then, the close relationship between Han Donglu and the 6 would become Li Tianlan's relationship. No, at the moment, the Special Warfare Group was in a precarious situation, and the Prince Group's foundation was also unstable. A considerable number of people in these 2 groups would be shaken. Once the fact that the Flourishing Age Fund belonged to Li Tianlan was exposed, sufficient financial resources, absolute military strength, a bright future, and huge support. All of this could make many people of the 2 groups board Li Tianlan's boat with the help of their relationship with Han Donglu. The Prince Group and the Special Warfare Group were the same. There must be Han Donglu's people in the Giant Group, and so would the Southeast Group. Most importantly, the North Group. All the signs showed that Han Donglu had a strong influence on the North Group, especially the potential leader of the North Group. His relationship with Han Donglu was practically indestructible. Dongqing Wudi suddenly thought of the past 2 years when the Giant Group was reshuffled. The North Group stood firmly on the side of the academics, and the Prince Group, and took one valuable position after another from the Southeast Group and the Giant Group. The strength of the North Group expanded rapidly. If there was no accident, Zhou Yunhai of the North Group would be re-elected in next year's election, and at least 2 people from the North Group would become the new members of parliament. Was the increased strength of the North Group Li Tianlan's strength? Military Counselor had been preparing for more than 2 years ago. On this day? In the past 2 years, the strength of the Giant Group had shrunk greatly because of the reshuffling. But if the North Group was added, its strength was even stronger than in its heyday. Dongqing Wudi's mind was buzzing. He thought of the most obvious points and felt a little emotional. He believed that it must be more than that. The combination of the Flourishing Age Fund and Emperor Dong's palace would completely cause a series of chain reactions. The Flourishing Age Fund made up for all the shortcomings of Emperor Dong's palace, whether in wealth or politics. There were more things that Emperor Dong's palace could not see at the moment. Zhongzhou State had made several secret asset evaluations on the Flourishing Age Fund, but all the evaluation reports were not comprehensive, and could not even get a general outline. Han Donglu had been too low-key before, at least in Zhongzhou State. Not many people knew what he had done in Zhongzhou State. He subconsciously took out a cigarette and lit it. He took a deep breath and asked with some uncertainty, really? He knew that Li Tianlan could not bullshit on this matter. If he had not gotten military counselor's promise or even allegiance, and was 100% sure that the Flourishing Age Fund was under his control, then even if Han Donglu was really military counselor, Li Tianlan would not have told him the news. The fact that he could say it meant that military counselor had fully proved his loyalty. The destruction of the Samsara Palace, the death of the master of Samsara Palace, and everything that once belonged to her were completely given to Li Tianlan by her. And it seemed that all of this was not out of control at present, except for the one in Northern Europe. Dongqing Wudi suddenly felt a little complicated. It was a kind of feeling that could not be put into words. Really? Li Tianlan simply nodded. You. Dongqing Wudi took a deep breath, and his heart became more and more complicated. He thought of the master of Samsara Palace again. Everyone thought that the Samsara Palace had no power in Zhongzhou State. The Wang family of Beihai and Kunlun City had always been very vigilant against other forces entering Zhongzhou State in the past. But who could have thought that without anyone noticing, the Samsara Palace had already extended its hands to Mount Shu and even set up the Flourishing Age Fund? He shook his head and whispered, "Now if everything goes well, you can totally set up a new group." The others finally came to their senses. Bai Qingqian breathed a sigh of relief and nodded. Indeed, a new group may not be as good as the academics and the Southeast group, but in terms of potential, it is definitely the most promising of all groups. If there was no accident. Dongqing Wudi spoke very cautiously, but in fact everyone knew that it was almost impossible for there to be an accident. The Flourishing Age Fund made up for all the shortcomings and defects of Emperor Dong's palace. Li Tianlan had all the connections, resources, wealth, and absolutely powerful forces. What Emperor Dong's palace lacked most now was the foundation accumulated over a long period of time. But the new forces generally had strong cohesion, which could make up for this to a certain extent. Although Emperor Dong's palace had no foundation, the Purgatory of Heaven capital inherited many things from the Li family. Li Tianlan was bound to take over the Purgatory of Heaven capital. Then Emperor Dong's palace would almost be another Wang family of Beihai, and it would be a replica of the Wang family of Beihai, the chosen one and the dynasty. This was a magnificent event that everyone was looking forward to. That's exactly what I'm thinking. Li Tianlan nodded and said slowly, "That's what I'm going to do next." Dongqing Wudi froze for a moment and instantly understood what Li Tianlan meant. "You want to set up a new group?" Li Tianlan replied with a hum. Dongqing Wudi vaguely understood what Li Tianlan wanted to talk to Bai Qingqian today. He smiled and whispered, "When I communicated with the president today, the president mentioned Prime Minister Hua, and said that you seem to have a different view." "I see." Li Tianlan did not agree to let Hua Zhenyang go further because he wanted to leave enough room for his group to develop. As the situation became clear, Wu Zhengmin was likely to become a director from a counselor this time. No matter what position, a director was enough to support the top structure of a group. However, with the resources Li Tianlan had now, it was difficult to find a suitable candidate for counselor. So Dongqing Wudi glanced at his wife. Without any hesitation, he nodded and said with a smile, "Yes, now the time is very suitable. I will fully support you." "Thank you, Minister." Li Tianlan nodded seriously and glanced at Bai Qingqian, intentionally or unintentionally. Bai Qingqian raised her eyebrows slightly and said with a soft smile, "Do you want me to go there?" The word pass was easy to say, but it wasn't easy to do. Li Tianlan had a good relationship with the giant group. The new group would certainly have a good relationship with the giant group. But there were bound to be different voices inside any group. This was the same as the existence of different groups in any country. It was unavoidable. Moreover, the structure of the giant group was relatively loose. The new group and the giant group could maintain the same general direction, which was already a reflection of their excellent relationship. There were bound to be conflicts in all aspects in daily life. Bai Qingqian had to change her position from the giant group to the new group. And it was a very clear change. The most direct change was that Bai Qingqian would definitely support the policy that was beneficial to Emperor Dong's palace, when it was in line with the interests of Zhongzhou state. This might hurt the interests of some people in the giant group, intentionally or unintentionally. Li Tianlan lit a cigarette, and was silent for a while. Then he whispered, "Yes, and I hope brother-in-law will come." His voice was calm, and he didn't hide his ambition and purpose at all. Asking Bai Qingqian to come here might be regarded as an emergency. He hoped that Wu Zhengmin and Bai Qingqian could lay out the layout for the new group in the next 5 years. But asking Zhou Yuanshan to come to the new group was tantamount to telling Dongqing Wudi that he wanted to take away the future of the giant group. He would constantly absorb fresh blood from the giant group, absorb the forces around him, and absorb the forces that could unite into the new group. The new group would be completely dominated by him. In short, it was annexation. Annexation of the giant group. It was naked, without any disguise. Dongqing Wudi's eyes remained unchanged. He chuckled and said, "Yes, as I said, I fully support it." Bai Qingqian also nodded. The reshuffle of the giant group was to get rid of those who didn't recognize Li Tianlan's position. If Li Tianlan could set up a new group and slowly absorb the forces that recognized Li Tianlan, it would be better. After all, no matter how the giant group was reshuffled, its relatively loose structure was difficult to change. Li Tianlan's body shook slightly. He took a deep look at Dongqing Wudi. The corner of his mouth moved, but he didn't make a sound. The door of the study was pushed open. Qin Weibai, who played the role of a waitress, came in with brewed tea and took away the cigarette from Li Tianlan's mouth when she went out. "I have no opinion." Zhou Yuanshan laughed. He knew what he represented here today. He represented not only himself, but also another pillar of the giant group, the Zhou family. "Which position do you want Qingqian to take?" Bai Zhanfang said with a smile. He directly cut into the development of the new group, which was a tacit acquiescence to Li Tianlan's idea. Dongqing Wudi, Bai Zhanfang, Zhou Yuanshan. The 3 pillars of the giant group had all expressed their support. Li Tianlan breathed a sigh of relief and whispered, "The cabinet." The deputy prime minister of the cabinet? Taking over Wu Zhengmin's position? Wu Zhengmin taking over Hua Zhengyang's position? In that case, Bai Zhanfang frowned. If this operation was successful, the new group would have a great influence in the cabinet. But in this way, the position of the head of the cabinet would become more sensitive than it was now. "What do you think of the prime minister's position?" Bai Zhanfang said slowly. Li Tianlan was silent for a while and whispered, "Wen Siyuan." Chapter 900. Wen Siyuan. Chairman of Beihai, Wen Siyuan. More than a year ago, it was almost certain that it would be very difficult for Wen Siyuan to become the new director. But more than a year ago or even earlier, Wen Siyuan was the candidate that the Southeast Group was going to promote as the new prime minister. If it weren't for the constant turmoil of the Southeast Group and the Wang family of Beihai in recent years, Wen Siyuan would have become the new prime minister without any suspense. With the turmoil of the Southeast Group, there was an obvious vacancy in the position of prime minister. So this position had become the most competitive position at this time. Bai Zhanfang thought about it and glanced at Dongqing Wudi. Dongqing Wudi frowned slightly, deep in thought. Not bad. Dongqing Hanguang suddenly laughed with some appreciation in his voice. Dongqing Wudi smiled bitterly. It was really good, but it didn't mean that the next thing would be simple. Pushing Wen Siyuan to be promoted would definitely get the strong support of the Southeast Group, and he would also get the Southeast Group's return. Wu Zhengmin's matter would no longer be a problem, and Bai Qingqian's position could basically be confirmed. The only thing he had to consider was that after Wen Siyuan entered the cabinet, he would not be easy to deal with in the future. Compared to the aggressive Chen Fangqing, Wen Siyuan's personality was more stable. His foresight might be slightly inferior to Chen Fangqing's, but his ability to control the overall situation was stronger. If Wu Zhengmin and Bai Qingqian could become the Deputy Prime Minister and Deputy Prime Minister respectively, the new group would become extremely powerful in the cabinet. However, if Wen Siyuan became the Prime Minister, Wu Zhengmin and Bai Qingqian would definitely be greatly constrained at some point. After all, the cooperation between the Giant Group and the Southeast Group was in the honeymoon period, but in essence, it was a mutual benefit. After the election next year, both sides would calm down, and the cooperation would naturally end naturally. At that time, the cabinet, whether it was the Southeast Group represented by Wen Siyuan or the new group, would constantly check and balance each other, and neither side would be too comfortable. However, promoting Wen Siyuan was the plan with the least resistance. Although it would be troublesome, it was the most acceptable situation for the new group. The problem was, what would Hua Zhengyang do if Wen Siyuan became the head of the cabinet? At present, Emperor Dong's palace and the Wang family of Beihai declared war on the Prince Group. The support of the academics was quite important, so they would also be the final winner. They had to reap their own benefits. Hua Zhengyang's arrangement couldn't be too bad. If the most important balance couldn't be achieved, such a transaction naturally wouldn't go smoothly. If that's the case, Hua Zhengyang won't have a suitable position. Zhou Yuanshan said thoughtfully. Yes and no. Bai Zhanfang shook his head. Li Huaqing Dongqing Wudi, Hua Zhengyang Wu Zhengmin, Yi Dongsheng, Wang Qinglei, Zhou Yunhai Guo Wentian. After the election, 8 of the 9 directors had been confirmed. Among them Li Huaqing, Dongqing Wudi, Hua Zhengyang, Guo Wentian and Zhou Yunhai were re-elected. Among the 5 people, the positions of Li Huaqing, Dongqing Wudi, and Zhou Yunhai could not be changed. There were only a few positions. If Hua Zhengyang did not control the cabinet, he would have very little choice. Zhou Mulan's position in the council could hardly satisfy the academics. To Hua Zhengyang, that position was a step backward. Hua Zhengyang would not be satisfied with Guo Wentian's position in the National Assembly either. If he couldn't become the prime minister, he would basically have to choose one of the 2 positions occupied by the Wang family of Beihai. Only in this way, along with some other compensations, would there be a possibility of the Academy accepting it. Department of Supervision, or the Vice President of Human Resources. Those 2 positions were what the Giant Group and the Southeast Group could offer, but didn't want to. No matter which position Hua Zhengyang took, it would not be less helpful to Li Huaqing than if Hua Zhengyang became the prime minister. If he became the vice president, then Li Huaqing and Hua Zhengyang would cooperate and hold the personnel power of Zhongzhou State tightly. This influence would not dissipate easily even after he retired. Go to the Department of Supervision? The Department of Supervision was in charge of the violations of all officials in Zhongzhou State. If Hua Zhengyang took this position, it meant that the Vice President of Human Resources was someone else. It would probably be Wang Qinglei. In this way, the candidate of the Ministry of Personnel would inevitably be Li Huaqing's confidant. In addition, Hua Zhengyang of the Department of Supervision. One was in charge of the appointment of national officials, and the other was in charge of the violations of national officials. It was enough to make people's scalps tingle when they thought about it. Should I make an appointment with the people of the Southeast Group and have a talk? Dongqing Wudi leaned on the sofa and whispered to himself. I'll go to the Wang family of Beihai after a while. Li Tianlan lowered his head and said lightly, I'll talk to Wang Xingxiao. Dongqing Wudi nodded. I'll find a chance to communicate with the president. He took a deep breath and shook his head slightly. Next year's election was almost the most complicated in recent decades. The rise of the new group would impact the pattern of the entire Zhongzhou state. How to form a situation acceptable to all parties was a test of everyone's wisdom. Dongqing Wudi rubbed his forehead and suddenly said, When will you go to Beihai? It depends. Li Tianlan whispered. In the next few days, all the problems of Haoyue Group will be exposed and fully affect the Prince Group. Military Counselor is talking to some people in the Prince Group. If it goes well, there will be a second voice in the Prince Group. In addition, Minister, the accountability of the Beijiang military region will also begin. Everyone in the Beijiang military region who died in the battle can't become a martyr. Dongqing Wudi nodded and said solemnly, I've sent an investigation team down. If the tens of thousands of people in the Beijiang military region who died in the battle this time couldn't become martyrs, then it could be imagined how disappointed other people in the Beijiang military region would be, and how disappointed the important military figures who belong to the Prince Group would be. Li Tianlan wanted to make the entire Prince Group completely split step by step. Chen Fangqing won't sit still, Dongqing Wudi said slowly. Of course. Li Tianlan nodded and said with a sneer. His only way now is to resist the pressure to destroy the Wang family of Beihai. If he succeeds, the Southeast Group will fall apart and the Wang family of Beihai will be completely destroyed. With huge benefits, all of us will focus on the Southeast Group, and the Prince Group can also take advantage of this opportunity to enhance its strength, so he will definitely contact those foreign forces and speed up the advance of the final battle in Beihai. When there is clear news from Beihai, it will be the time for me to go to Beihai. The more Chen Fangqing wants to do, the more I will make him unable to do it. Dongqing Wudi smiled and said, During this time, stay in Yuzhou? I'll introduce some people to you. He had never thought that Li Tianlan would set up a new group. This was mainly because he didn't know the identity of military counselor. Therefore, the whole giant group was the team that Dongqing Wudi prepared for Li Tianlan. If there was no military counselor, Li Tianlan would be the leader of the giant group in the future. But now that military counselor had built a better team of the new group, Dongqing Wudi naturally had to speed up the transfer of part of the power of the giant group to the new group. Li Tianlan had never seen many of them, so it was a good opportunity to do so. Li Tianlan was silent for a moment and whispered, I plan to go back to Tiannan tomorrow. Go back to Tiannan. Emperor Dong's palace was his foundation. But since the appearance of Emperor Dong's palace, he seemed to have only been to Tiannan once. Li Tianlan laughed at himself and continued, The victims of the nightmare troop will be buried the day after tomorrow. I have to go back to see them off. Dongqing Wudi glanced at Li Tianlan and whispered, It's my duty. There's one more thing. Li Tianlan lowered his eyes slightly and whispered, Military counselor is already looking for her. Minister, if possible, help me find Yuetong's whereabouts. Looking for Wang Yuetong. Zhou Yuanshan narrowed his eyes and looked at Li Tianlan seriously. Dongqing Wudi nodded and said, Okay. Li Tianlan suddenly laughed. His laughter was very low and had a very strange tone to it. He looked up at Dongqing Wudi's eyes and said seriously, Minister, am I going too far? Dongqing Wudi's body stiffened for a moment. Why? Li Tianlan chuckled and said, Aren't you going to say something? Dongqing Wudi moved the corner of his mouth and subconsciously glanced at Bai Qingqian beside him. Bai Qingqian clenched her hands, and her face was a little pale. Tianlan weak. Bai Qingqian tried to speak. Li Tianlan suddenly interrupted her and said with a smile, No hurry, let's talk about it next time. He didn't wait for Bai Qingqian to say anything and turned his eyes to Zhou Yuanshan. Brother-in-law, I want to talk to you alone. Zhou Yuanshan was stunned and nodded. Okay. Let's go out first. Dongqing Wudi forced a smile, stood up and walked out of the study. His pace was a little hurried. Everyone left the study in turn. Only Zhou Yuanshan sat where he was. Bai Qingqian walked at the end. When she passed by Li Tianlan, she wanted to say something but stopped on second thought. Li Tianlan moved his eyes away. Bai Qingqian forced a smile and seemed to reach out to touch Li Tianlan's head. But she finally withdrew her hand and left the study. Zhou Yuanshan watched all this quietly. He looked at Li Tianlan, whose face was a little complicated. Why don't you let them go on? He asked suddenly. Li Tianlan was silent for a long time and then whispered, Does it make sense? Yes. Zhou Yuanshan nodded seriously. He hesitated and asked tentatively, Are you suspecting something? Not suspecting. Li Tianlan nodded. I'm not a fool. I want to know an answer, but suddenly I feel. He paused and whispered, That's also good. Well, that's good. That's it. In the living room downstairs, Dongqing Qiuqi took her daughter Dongqing Yu out of the stroller and put her beside her. The baby, who was a few months old, had fallen asleep. Qin Weibai, Bai Yuming, and Dongqing Qiuqi were sitting on the sofa and chatting. Seeing Dongqing Wudi come out first, Qin Weibai and others stood up at the same time. Minister, where's Tianlan? Qin Weibai asked softly. Dongqing Wudi forced a smile and said softly, he's chatting with Yuan Shan. Qin Weibai nodded and said yes. Looking at Dongqing Hongguang and Bai Qingqian who came out later, she smiled and said, I'll wash the fruit for you. Boss Qin. Little Bai. Dongqing Wudi and Bai Qingqian spoke at the same time. They were husband and wife, but they called her by different names. Qin Weibai said and looked back at the two. Dongqing Wudi took a deep breath and said softly, thank you. Qin Weibai smiled and said nothing. Bai Qingqian came over, took Qin Weibai's hand, stared at her dreamy perfect face, and said softly with a smile, stay tonight and chat with me. Qin Weibai hesitated. She wanted to say that it depended on Li Tianlan, but when the words came to her mouth, she nodded and said, okay. Dongqing Wudi looked away and said softly, from now on, you and Tianlan will stay in Tiannan and take care of him. We are all at ease with you by his side. He paused, as if he didn't know if it was appropriate for him to say this, but he shook his head and continued with a smile. Of course, if he bullies you and feels wronged, you can tell your aunt at any time. You can also tell me, and we can help you teach. No, we can talk to him. Qin Weibai took a deep look at Dongqing Wudi. A slight smile bloomed from the corner of her mouth. She held Bai Qingqian's hand, nodded to Dongqing Wudi, and said with a smile, thank you, Dad. Dongqing Wudi's body suddenly stiffened. Bai Qingqian's body trembled and subconsciously held Qin Weibai's hand. She lowered her head, and her eyes turned red for a moment. Chapter 901. Weak and soft lights filled the somewhat dark hall, and the inconspicuous light illuminated all the important corners of the hall. Huge and sophisticated instruments were placed in a disorderly manner, connected to screens. In the middle of the hall, there was a row of utensils that could be used for people to lie in. Strictly speaking, this was the best nutrition chamber, or hibernation chamber, but just by looking at its appearance, it looked like a neatly arranged coffin. The air in the hall was cool, and it looked extremely clean and tidy. Countless instruments made a slight buzzing sound when they were in operation. The instruments that were always in operation, the cold and empty hall, and the continuous buzzing sound, all of this seemed to be completely frozen in the dark environment, like a frozen oil painting. On the left side of the hall was an elevator. At this moment, the arrow on the elevator screen slowly jumped down, and finally stopped completely. Primary authority confirmed, Level 2 authority confirmed, highest authority confirmed, please enter the password. The voice in the elevator sounded in the hall at the same time. The password is correct, please enter your fingerprint. Activate the pupil recognition system. Please enter the password. The password is correct, welcome doctor. In the mechanical electronic sound, the elevator door slowly opened. A young woman with short hair and a delicate face walked into the hall. Behind her on both sides were two middle-aged men with serious and rigorous temperaments. A middle-aged man immediately pressed a red button in the hall. At the same time, countless screens in the hall lit up almost at the same time, dispelling the darkness in the hall. Countless data slowly flowed on each screen. The young woman, who looked to be in her 20s, raised her head and looked at the huge screen in the center. A large amount of data was reflected in her charming silver pupils, and her expression was quiet, serious, and focused. Another middle-aged man took a folder and walked over, and said in a low voice, Dr. Naylan, this is the key physical data of medical record number 2. The initial data was 3 days ago, and the last record was 6 hours ago. Naylan Shurying, who had short hair and silver eyes, was quiet and focused, took the folder and the pen in the folder. The physical data recorded on the folder were simplified symbols that only professionals could understand. Naylan Shurying drew on the more important symbols with a thoughtful look in her eyes. She quickly browsed through the folder in her hand, walked forward, and arrived in front of a hibernation chamber. The middle-aged assistant turned on the light button of the hibernation pod. Under the faint light, everything in the hibernation pod was immediately presented to Naylan Shurying's eyes. Inside the hibernation chamber was a man who looked thin and short. Perhaps because he had been lying there for a long time. His hair was very long and looked extremely messy. It made his face look even paler. He was lying flat and was completely covered in a large amount of foam. He was so quiet that he looked like a lifelike human specimen. Nalan Shuriying looked at him for a while and remained silent. The man in the hibernation pod was so frail and small. Who would have thought that he was a big shot standing at the peak of the dark world before he fell into a coma? They were not at the peak of this era. They belonged to the peak of the Sword Emperor's era. There were chosen ones, half-step chosen ones, and the peak of the invincible realm in that era. His most powerful time was very short, but in that short period of time, he successfully killed Arceus, an expert at the peak of the invincible realm in the state of coronation, killed thousands of the most elite saint warriors of the Vatican, and he had even heavily injured the Sword Emperor, who had almost stepped into the ranks of geniuses. Situangia. The Vatican might not forget this name for a very long time. Nalan Shuriying shook her head slightly and looked at the small screens on the edge of the hibernation pod. His heartbeat was normal, and his breathing was normal. She pressed a button, and an X-ray quickly appeared on an instrument on the other side. Nalan Shuriying took the X-ray and looked at it carefully for a while. Then she nodded and said, "His body has basically recovered." Tribulation was sent to Tiannan about half a month ago. Yuzhou had basically determined his physical state, but they still couldn't wake him up. Emperor Dong's palace took the initiative to take Tribulation over and started the deepest level of treatment and observation. All the physical data showed that Tribulation's muscles had returned to normal, and his bones had begun to heal slowly. At present, he was close to the level of a normal person, but he was still unconscious. Nalan Shuriying looked at him and was silent for a while. Then she whispered, "Continue to observe." The two assistants froze for a moment and said subconsciously, "Observe." In their original plan, if Tribulation's body was really normal but he couldn't wake up, the next thing they should consider was different levels of mental stimulation. Observe first. Nalan Shuriying nodded and said, "His Highness Li Tianlan will come back in the near future. We'll see what he thinks then." The two assistants nodded and didn't say much. Nalan Shuriying handed the document in her hand to the assistant and walked to another hibernation pod. "How's the situation of medical record number 1? "Same as always," the assistant said with a bitter smile. "Her body is still slowly recovering, but in a short time, there is no hope of recovering to the level of a normal person. We often monitor her brain waves, and the data is even lower than that of medical record number 1. Her body is quite seriously damaged, and it can be said that she is infinitely close to death." Nalan Shuriying's footsteps paused. "No." She shook her head and whispered, "You haven't seen a person who is really infinitely close to death." He came to the hibernation pod in the middle and turned on the light source. In the hibernation pod, Dongqing Rushi, who was covered with foam, closed her eyes and didn't move. Nalan Shuriying watched all this quietly. Her heart was heavy, and her body was a little cold. Dongqing Rushi had been in a coma for 2 years. Her body was indeed getting better, but there was still a long time before she really recovered and woke up. A very, very long time. It was so long that Nalan Shuriying couldn't even see hope. 2 years ago, Li Tianlan almost overturned the entire Beihai province. One of the most important contents of his deal with the Wang family of Beihai was to ask the Wang family of Beihai to completely cure Dongqing Rushi. So Nalan Shuriying was sent to Tiannan by summer solstice with the most advanced equipment and a top medical team. But today, she was completely sure that the progress they had made could not satisfy Li Tianlan, who was about to return to Tiannan. The situation in Beihai had been extremely tense. Nalan Shuriying was not sure whether Dongqing Rushi's condition would make the situation facing Beihai worse. She stared blankly at Dongqing Rushi, who was motionless in the hibernation pod, and was silent for a long time. "Observe closely." After a long time, she took a deep breath and said in a low voice, "I stay in the lab most of the time. If anything happens, tell me immediately." "Understood." The two assistants spoke at the same time. Nalan Shuriying nodded, walked aside, and turned on a computer that was connected to all the equipment. She took out a folder again and began to record the latest physical data of Dongqing Rushi and tribulation. The two assistants were carefully inspecting the sophisticated equipment in the hall and doing their daily maintenance. No one spoke. The hall became quiet again. Without anyone noticing, the space in the dimly lit hall began to tremble slightly. The transparent air seemed to become a line. The tiny line continued to spread and spread to the side of Dongqing Rushi's hibernation pod. The whole air suddenly twisted for a moment. A man in black appeared beside Dongqing Rushi. The dense sword energy completely wrapped Dongqing Rushi's hibernation pod. And in an instant, it became an independent space. The fingers of the man in black shook slightly. More sword energy appeared outside the independent space. The sword energy shook the air and quickly turned into another hibernation pod made of pure sword energy. Nalan Shuriying unconsciously raised her head and glanced in the direction of Dongqing Rushi. The hibernation pod was still there, and the light was still on. She sighed softly, lowered her head, and continued to copy the data. The man in black stood there quietly, looking down at Dongqing Rushi, who seemed to have no breath of life in the hibernation pod, with a complicated look in his eyes. It was a kind of complicated look that contained countless emotions: blame, love, helplessness, guilt, and bitterness. He gently put his palm on the hibernation pod, slightly narrowed his eyes, and laughed self-deprecatingly. Why didn't you ever think? Why did Jade Pool give you the silent sword? Why didn't you ever think that it was abnormal for the Dongqing clan to brainwash you again and again for so many years? Silence gave you the destructive power of the invincible realm when you were in the thunder-shocking realm, at the cost of your own life. After so many years of brainwashing, plus silence, how obvious is that? The Dongqing clan just wanted to keep you by his side, to use you as his most powerful safeguard before he grew up. In East Island, I stopped you from drawing the sword for the first time. Didn't you realize something? I'm disappointed. His voice gradually deepened. I'm disappointed in you. Dongqing Rushi, who was in the hibernation pod, didn't move. So stupid. The man in black breathed a sigh of relief and sneered. Your mother betrayed me for you. Why did you do that? You're not even as good as her. You made yourself like this. Who came to see you in the past 2 years? What did you get for lying down for 2 years? If I give you another chance, I don't know if you'll regret it. The man in black stared at Dongqing Rushi deeply and said in a low voice, Is it worth it? If this is a deal, I don't think it's fair. He whispered to himself, and his eyes fell on the heart rate detector screen of the hibernation pod. Looking at the numbers on the screen, he was silent for a long time. I'm disappointed. He spoke again. Dongqing Rushi didn't respond, and she was destined not to give any response. The man in black laughed softly. You're willing to die for him, so he should be willing to die for you. Only in this way it's fair. He straightened his body bit by bit, and said in a calm voice, I'll send him down and wait for you. What do you say? Chapter 902. In the quiet hall, Nalan Shuriying slowly stood up. She recorded the latest body data of Dongqing Rushi and tribulation respectively, planning to leave here and go to her own lab to study. The subtle and imperceptible sword energy space began to separate layer by layer. The black-clothed man silently followed Nalan Shuriying into the elevator. The elevator slowly went up 15 meters underground. He entered the password 3 times on the way, and finally came to the surface. The elevator opened, and Nalan Shuriying walked out, and went in another direction. The black-clothed man, who was calm and indifferent, seemed to have no emotions and aura, glanced at Nalan Shuriying and slowly walked out of the elevator. Outside the elevator was an incredibly grand hall. The length of thousands of meters was divided into rooms. In the central area, there was a rockery, a fish pond, and a small garden. The huge space and the nearly 20-meter-high dome made the whole hall look magnificent. Standing in it, everyone could feel their own insignificance. It was not a hall, but a small square. The black-clothed man watched quietly. In his sight, the combatants and civil servants of Emperor Dong's palace kept coming in and out, in 2s and 3s, constantly talking about something. There were not many people in Emperor Dong's palace, so this very advanced hall seemed extremely empty. The black-clothed man stood there for a while, then silently moved forward and walked out of the main entrance of the hall. The main entrance of the hall was a huge fountain square. Thousands of fountains were constantly spraying transparent water columns. The water columns rose tens of meters into the sky and converged in the center. A majestic and awe-inspiring pitch-black greatsword stood in the center of the water column. The greatsword was as tall as the huge castle behind the black-clothed man. Countless splashes of water slowly flowed on the greatsword, sparkling with colorful rays of light under the sunlight. The black-clothed man's mouth twitched. He had almost never seen such a large fountain square. Not to mention in Tiannan, even in Yuzhou, a fountain square of this scale could almost be regarded as a landmark. He narrowed his eyes, smiled self-mockingly, and whispered, "This is really the style of a nouveau riche." His figure directly passed by the fountain square, straight ahead, and stepped on a verdant lawn. There was a group of white pigeons that were not afraid of humans on the lawn. Several young women of Emperor Dong's palace seemed to be feeding the pigeons on the lawn during the break. The white pigeons fluttered their wings and landed on their palms to peck the corn in their palms, causing a burst of crisp and energetic laughter. A large golden retriever lay lazily in the middle of the lawn. Before the man in black could approach, the big dog that was lying lazily in the grass had already straightened its body and was looking straight in the direction of the man in black. The black-clothed man's body suddenly stiffened. He felt awkward and incredulous at the same time. He looked at the golden retriever in front of him, confused. He couldn't understand how the golden retriever had discovered him. The seemingly docile big dog slowly arched its body and let out a low growl, as if it would pounce at any moment. The man in black frowned. The sword chi around him vibrated slightly. The golden retriever's tail suddenly stood up, and its body tensed up to the extreme. "It can't see me, but it can feel the surrounding sword chi?" The man in black frowned. His figure flickered, and he instantly passed by the golden retriever. The golden retriever whimpered and turned around twice. It seemed to be a little confused. It ran around for a while, and it seemed to feel no danger. It whimpered and lazily patted down again. "What the hell is going on?" the man in black muttered to himself. He passed by the lawn and stepped on a wide arch bridge. Under the arch bridge was a clear stream. The circulating water surrounded the entire Emperor Dong's palace. It was a huge artificial lake. The man in black stood at the other end of the bridge and looked back at Emperor Dong's palace. The huge 6-story castle of Emperor Dong's palace was facing the pitch-black giant sword in front of the gate. It was like a giant standing in front of a hill, so tall and majestic, with a large shadow that almost blocked the sun. The man in black glanced at it expressionlessly, then turned around and left. His figure was getting farther and farther away. On the edge of the magnificent and huge Emperor Dong's palace was a busy construction site. It was very noisy. Construction teams from different places were busy with their own work. The place where the black-robed men were supposed to be building an office building. Were they planning a camp further away? Or a canteen? It was destined to become the area of Emperor Dong's palace in the future. But at present, the construction site was much larger than the already built Emperor Dong's palace. The man in black could clearly feel the footsteps and ambitions of Emperor Dong's palace. It was destined to be the center of Emperor Dong's palace in the future, and the entire Xianyuan city would be absorbed by Emperor Dong's palace bit by bit. Shopping malls, schools, hospitals, supermarkets, clubs, everything in the city would become a part of Emperor Dong's palace. There would no longer be ordinary citizens here. The residents here would be the staff of Emperor Dong's palace, the combatants, and their families. The city would become Li Tianlan's private territory, with a small population, a comfortable environment, luxurious facilities, a lot of funds and citizens of the city. Many years later, it would inevitably become one of the most beautiful cities in Zhongzhou State, one of the most prosperous cities, and the city with the strongest concentration of residents. That was the new city plan. It was a plan that basically copied the ideas of the Wang family of Beihai, but it summarized some defects of Mount Dibing, so it became more perfect in the later stage. The man in black walked out of the construction site and looked at the city that was changing almost every day. He was silent for a long time. That was the scene of his dream. It was also the future that he had fantasized about a long time ago. It was also the future that a wealthy family that could maintain aggression against all forces and countries and unite around a hegemon-level country should have in his mind. He had imagined many times a scene similar to that of Emperor Dong's palace today. But he couldn't do it. Even if he now controlled the Purgatory of Heaven capital. Even if the Purgatory of Heaven capital was still a superpower in the dark world. But no money. That was the most painful point. Li Kuang-tu, dressed in black, had a twisted and complicated expression. The Purgatory of Heaven capital was equivalent to the former Li family. But the former Li family did not represent the Purgatory of Heaven capital. The Purgatory of Heaven capital, which collapsed and gathered again, did inherit a lot of things from the Li family, including wealth, talents in all aspects, and powerful warriors. But after all, it was not the complete Li family. He had lurked in East Island for many years and accumulated a lot of wealth. Li Kuang-tu was rich. An investment of hundreds of millions or even billions was not a problem for him. He could even get tens of billions. But compared with Li Tianlan, the little money he had made him look like a pauper. When he first heard about the new city plan, it was like a joke. The income generated by the 5 countries in Eastern Europe was indeed terrifying, and the Flourishing Age Fund had invested a lot in Emperor Dong's palace. Under normal circumstances, Li Tianlan was not short of money, but no one believed that Emperor Dong's palace could really start the new city plan. The establishment of Xianyuan City was like a signal. Donghuang, in the shortest time possible, the palace had invested all of its financial resources into Xianyuan City. Money was consumed crazily and Xianyuan City continued to develop. Even during the period when Zhongzhou State gradually reduced its support for Xianyuan City, Emperor Dong's palace did not stop. Where did the money come from? This was the question that puzzled Li Kuang-tu the most. The professionals of the Purgatory of Heaven capital had already made professional statistics. Even if the interests of the 5 countries in Eastern Europe were beyond imagination, Emperor Dong's palace could not mobilize such a huge amount of funds. As Zhongzhou State's attitude became clearer, the wealthy families that invested in Emperor Dong's palace became more cautious. Such a situation was bound to cause a break in the capital of Emperor Dong's palace. But here was the problem. Not only did Emperor Dong's palace not have a problem with its funds, but they could mobilize more and more money. This could be seen from the overall transformation of Xianyuan City, the construction and expansion of Emperor Dong's palace, and the overall transformation of Xianyuan City. In nearly a year, Changning Qiancheng, Xianyuan City, launched dozens of large-scale projects in a row. They really did not consider the problem of a break in the capital. In fact, their capital did not break. The Purgatory of Heaven capital had not figured out where the money came from. But today, where the money came from was no longer important. What mattered was that the new city plan of Emperor Dong's palace was actually possible to be realized. At this rate, it would take at most 5 years. 5 years later, Xianyuan City would become a complete Emperor Dong's palace. With all kinds of resources coming in continuously, it meant that in 6 or 7 years at most, the whole Tiannan would become the back garden of Emperor Dong's palace. What everyone did not know, or subconsciously ignored, was Li Kuang-tu's current martial arts. To be exact, it was the secret that he suddenly appeared after many years of dormancy. In the past 2 decades, in everyone's impression, the biggest traitor in Zhongzhou State had already fallen. Summer Solstice had resisted Li Kuang-tu's attack with a murderous weapon at the cost of her martial arts foundation. While destroying the murderous weapon, she had almost completely destroyed Li Kuang-tu's martial arts foundation. He had completely fallen under the siege of several invincible realm experts and many experts at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm. This was everyone's impression. No one knew that he could recover, lurk in East Island, and set up the Purgatory of Heaven capital. When the Purgatory of Heaven capital first appeared, deity, who could compete with Wang Tianzong, could be said to be brilliant. But except for a few people, no one knew the true identity of deity. His identity was completely exposed in the chaos in Eastern Europe 2 years ago. But with the eternal sword above Mormons ending Wang Tianzong, that era had come to an end. Maybe someone would pay attention to Wang Tianzong. But there were very few people who paid attention to Li Kuang-tu. There were even fewer people who paid attention to Li Guangtu's martial arts. Almost no one wanted to know how Li Guangtu could set foot on the peak of the invincible realm, when his foundation was almost ruined. The martial arts that Li Guangtu had been exposed to since he was a child was the 24 moves of sword. The 24 moves of sword of the Li family. But it also contained a lot of the strengths of the Wang family of Beihai and the Lin clan's martial arts. All his martial arts foundation had completed a most desperate nirvana when the foundation was almost completely ruined. He embarked on his own path when he was in the worst state. The longevity seal and the immortal seal. The inspiration absorbed from the 24 moves of sword transformed into a new unique technique, which became the key to reshaping his foundation. The most important thing was that he used to have the dragon vein, although it was only a part of the dragon vein. Now, although his dragon vein had inexplicably disappeared, a large amount of vitality was still nourishing his flesh and blood. Powerful recovery ability. Martial arts that reshaped the foundation. All of this meant that no matter how serious his injury was, as long as he was not dead, he could recover faster than others and other experts at the same level. In the chaos in Eastern Europe, he was the first to wake up from a coma. He stayed in Tiannan for 2 years and didn't make a move. Everyone thought that his injury was serious, or even completely destroyed. He stood in the darkness where no one could see and silently recovered from his injury. His injury was more serious than that of Lin Fengting. But today his state was even slightly better than Lin Fengting's. Those injuries had not healed yet. But now he was the real #1 expert in the dark world. Li Guangtu was not in a hurry. He was not in a hurry at all. He felt that he still had enough time. The game between Beihai, Zhongzhou State, and the giant group had been in a stalemate. One advanced and the other retreated, and the three parties were trying their best to maintain a balance. Before the result of the game came out, it was difficult for Li Tianlan to get out of the desert prison. And at Li Tianlan's age and physical condition, it was almost impossible for him to enter the invincible realm. In Li Guangtu's view, such a game would not have a relatively clear result until after next year's election at the earliest. In other words, he had at least a year to keep a low profile and recuperate. It was difficult for him to be sure that he would recover in a year, but he had his advantages. The longevity seal and the immortal seal were enough to make his state better in the next year, and further get rid of Lin Fengting, who was also recovering. At that time, he would undoubtedly have more confidence. Even if there were any accidents in the middle, the time of the game would be further extended. Li Guangtu had already begun to think of ways to intervene in the internal game of Zhongzhou State, intending to create some chaos. But he never thought that Chen Fangqing would be so stupid as to start a bullshit termination plan. The most ridiculous thing was that the plan was completely exposed not long after it started. Li Guangtu, who was not mentally prepared, was completely dumbfounded as he watched all of this develop rapidly. Before anyone could react, the academics had successfully withdrawn, and Chen Fangqing, who was in control of the game, directly began his most intense means. He no longer paid attention to the so-called balance, nor did he care about the impact in the future. Therefore, because of the withdrawal of the academics, Chen Fangqing, who had no choice, blocked the desert prison in an extremely radical way. The game had become a real war. There was no doubt that Chen Fangqing lost. He might not be a complete failure now, but Li Tianlan always came out of the desert prison, and the shocking sword over the desert meant that the giant group and the southeast group had achieved a stage victory in this war. Haoyue group had an accident. Special warfare group had an accident. All this was Li Tianlan and Wang Shengxiao's counterattack. The subsequent development was almost not difficult to guess. Li Guangtu couldn't understand why Chen Fangqing was so stupid. Maybe he was not stupid, but from the moment the termination plan was exposed, he had no choice. The termination plan was not a mistake. The only mistake was that it was exposed. Li Guangtu didn't bother to think about the inside story. The reality was in front of him. He had wanted to wait a little longer. But Li Tianlan's strength was beyond his expectation. According to Li Tianlan's current growth rate, in less than 3 years, even if he recovered from his injury, he might not be able to defeat Li Tianlan. Not to mention 3 years later, even now, Li Tianlan had Xian Yuanfeng in his hand. In the case that Xian Yuanfeng had sufficient energy, he was not sure that he could win. This was a terrible thing. For Li Guangtu, this was even the most terrible thing. The most terrible thing. Once he couldn't defeat Li Tianlan, or was suppressed by Li Tianlan, he could imagine what would happen to him. Everything that belonged to him would be taken away by Li Tianlan. Because they were all from the Li family. For many people in the purgatory of heaven capital, their sense of belonging was actually the same. There were not many people who were loyal to Li Tianlan. There were also not many people who were loyal to Li Guangtu. Most people in the purgatory of heaven capital had a sense of belonging to the Li family. Once he was left behind by Li Tianlan, with his infinite future possibilities, he could almost make Li Guangtu lose everything in the shortest time. So Li Guangtu didn't want to wait, and he didn't dare to wait. He had planned to wait a few more years. When Emperor Dong's palace completely swallowed up Xianyuan City, and when everything in Emperor Dong's palace was completed, as long as he killed Li Tianlan, he could take over everything left by Li Tianlan in the shortest time, and become the new Emperor Dong. This meant that he could get a whole city, a city built with a lot of money that he didn't even dare to imagine. If the purgatory of heaven capital got the complete Emperor Dong's palace and Xianyuan City, it was almost equivalent to getting the whole Tiannan. The purgatory of heaven capital would become the most terrifying force in the dark world. But Li Tianlan's speed of growth made him dare not delay at all. Under the sun, Li Guangtu stood on the edge of the construction site, muttered something to himself silently, and then shook his head. He stood there and waited for a minute. A pitch-black Passat slowly drove over. If it was in Tiannan 2 years ago, it could be said to be an absolute luxury car. But in the current Xianyuan City, it was a completely inconspicuous ordinary car. Li Guangtu sat in the car, rubbed his forehead, and let out a long sigh. How's Moon God? The driver was Daybreak, another invincible realm expert of the purgatory of heaven capital. His injury had completely recovered, but he hadn't stabilized his realm for the time being. His powerful aura was constantly fluctuating. Not good. Li Guangtu whispered, very not good. His voice was a little depressed. Daybreak was silent for a while, started the car, and whispered, it's not necessarily hopeless. I've heard of Silver Eyes in Beihai. She can be regarded as an authoritative figure in this field. Now the cooperation between Beihai and Emperor Dong's palace is at a critical period. Even if it's to please Li Tianlan, the Wang family of Beihai will inevitably work harder to let Silver Eyes save Moon God. It's a good thing to let her stay here for the time being. She's too slow. Maybe I should talk to the Wang family of Beihai, of course, after the final battle. Li Guangtu narrowed his eyes. After the final battle, he would kill Li Tianlan and annex Emperor Dong's palace before Zhongzhou state reacted. And after the final battle, if Li Tianlan died, the current situation in Zhongzhou state would be different again. Daybreak was silent for a while and didn't speak. How's Dawn doing in East Island? Li Guangtu suddenly asked. Everything is going well. Daybreak nodded. My Shiranui is very cooperative. At present, Dawn has regained control of Liuhua Palace. In Heaven Capital, our pawns have been activated. At present, we can be sure that in order to recapture the south of Beihai Province, East Island will invest a considerable part of its power in this final battle. Their interior will inevitably be empty. With the cooperation of Liuhua Palace, we can get back part of the power of East Island. Liuhua Palace was a name that had been dim in the dark world for several years. It was also a martial arts force that was as famous as Wuji Palace and Jifeng Sword Training School a few years ago. Shinichi Miyamoto, the palace master of Liuhua Palace, was also recognized as the peak ninja in the whole dark world. He controlled the most elite divine wind force in East Island. In terms of actual power, he was no less than Tianhai Wuji and Yagyu Kurasumi. But in the final battle of Heaven Capital 5 years ago, Shinichi Miyamoto of the Invincible Realm died in the hands of Tribulation. Therefore, Tribulation broke through and directly entered the Invincible Realm from the Chi-controlling realm. But Liuhua Palace never recovered. After the Purgatory of Heaven Capital entered East Island, my Shiranui, the young palace master, was the first to seek refuge with the Purgatory of Heaven capital. The sphere of influence of Liuhua Palace was maintained under the protection of the Purgatory of Heaven capital. As the Purgatory of Heaven capital gradually withdrew from East Island in the past 2 years, Liuhua Palace was annexed by the other two martial arts forces all the time. Now there was a chance to establish contact with the Purgatory of Heaven capital again. Mai Shiranui, who had no way out, had no chance to refuse. When the final battle takes place, go to East Island and kill all the Tom, Dick and Harry. I'll see the result of the final battle, and consider whether to talk to the Mikado of East Island. Li Kuangtu gently raised the corner of his mouth, and his smile was a little mocking. Daybreak was now an invincible realm superior. Together with Dawn and Phoenix, he would come to East Island with the elites of the Purgatory of Heaven capital. When East Island put most of its power into the final battle, they could sweep everything. After the final battle, in the worst case, the Purgatory of Heaven capital could regain control of East Island. The best case was to control the Zhongzhou state and the dark world of East Island, unify Tiannan, conquer the underground world of Southeast Asia, and establish a real dynasty. Li Kuangtu looked out of the window. His eyes were extremely bright, like two wildfires burning. Daybreak hesitated and said softly, "East Island won't be a big problem. I can go to Beihai with you." Li Kuangtu was silent for a while, then slowly shook his head and said, "It's not necessary." He was confident enough in his strength. God. Li Tianlan may not be able to take him down with Xian Yuanfeng. Daybreak said calmly. Li Kuangtu laughed. "I'm not fighting with him alone. Xian Yuanfeng is really strong, but it's just a murderous weapon in essence. Its energy will be exhausted. After all, in the final battle he will face more than one invincible realm expert. When Xian Yuanfeng's energy is almost exhausted, I will make a move, and it will be enough to decide his life or death in an instant." Daybreak was silent for a while, and held the steering wheel tightly. He glanced at Li Kuangtu through the rearview mirror, hesitated, and said softly, "Your Highness." Li Kuangtu glanced at him. "How much strength has he recovered now?" Daybreak asked softly. This was something that every high-level official in the Purgatory of Heaven capital was very concerned about. Everyone knew that Li Kuangtu recovered very fast in secret, and he was in a good state. This was also an important source of confidence for them to plot against East Island again. But no one knew how much Li Kuangtu had recovered. Li Kuangtu was silent for a while and said calmly, "In the normal state, I've recovered about 70%, which is about the same as my heyday before I went to Eastern Europe." Daybreak's eyes lit up. He went to the heyday of Eastern Europe. At that time, Li Kuangtu was a god, with the strength that could break through the peak of the invincible realm at any time. This was Li Kuangtu's normal state now. Li Kuangtu smiled and continued to say, "If necessary, I can exert about 90% of my strength in a short time, which is enough to deal with any situation." Li Kuangtu's 90% strength now. This was not his peak state now, but it had definitely surpassed the limit of the peak of the invincible realm. Daybreak was silent for a while and laughed. "Then I'll go back to East Island." He was talking about going back to East Island. Not going there. He was going back to the territory that used to belong to him. Li Kuangtu nodded and whispered, "We'll get back everything we lost." Chapter 903. When he walked out of the train station of Xianyuan City, Yuan Lin even thought that he had come to the wrong place. In his initial impression, Xianyuan City should have been a small city belonging to Annan State. After it was split, it became one of the cities belonging to Tiannan State. Tiannan had always been in a state of chaos, with undercurrents surging. It had never been peaceful. This small city, originally called Tunan, was full of destruction, crime, violence, and barbarism. The population here was getting smaller and smaller, and the city was getting more and more dilapidated. Every street and every road in the urban area should be full of decay and depression. This was the Tunan City in Yuan Lin's impression. After Tunan City became Xianyuan City, Zhongzhou State, Emperor Dong's palace, and many wealthy families and investment institutions in Zhongzhou State invested a lot of money here. In various reports, The new Xianyuan city was changing rapidly. Yuan Lin had read many reports submitted to the cabinet. In his impression, the so-called rapid change should just barely get rid of the previous appearance of Tunan City. At most, it should be a little better than Tunan City. It should be almost the same as a county in the inland of Zhongzhou State. At most, it should be a relatively well-developed county. After all, how could a small city with a very poor foundation develop so fast in 2 years? But the moment he walked out of the station, the scenes in front of him suddenly made him a little absent-minded. There were indeed no high-rise buildings like those in Huading, Yuzhou in Xianyuan City. The buildings here were relatively low, but absolutely did not feel the slightest sense of dilapidation. New. They were all obviously newly built buildings. Every building had a different style, and they were arranged neatly. There was an exaggerated distance between the buildings, but they were not empty. They were all filled with lawns and gardens, and in the middle of the lawns and gardens, there were clean and tidy paths paved with stone slabs, quiet and tidy. Between the buildings on both sides were wide and somewhat incredible streets. The smooth streets stretched all the way to the end of the site. Perhaps it was because the south was relatively warm. Even in winter, flowers were still blooming on the green belt that isolated the sidewalks and driveways. Under the bright sun, the fresh air with almost no industrial pollution blew over. Both the vehicles and the pedestrians in sight were indescribably leisurely. No, it was not leisurely. Yuan Lin was stunned for a long time before he realized the problem. As the first deputy director of the cabinet office and the chief secretary of the prime minister, he spent most of his time in Yuzhou or inspecting various places in Zhongzhou State with Chen Fangqing. He traveled to many places. However, he had never seen a city like Xianyuan City. The biggest difference was the population density. There were very few people in Xianyuan City. It was so little that it was hard to believe. There was no heavy traffic, no dense flow of people. The wide streets, the beautiful city, the fresh air, and the almost cold population made everything in the city look very leisurely. It was an indescribable feeling of comfort. Is this really Tiannan? Tiannan Xianyuan City? Yuan Lin was dumbfounded. He walked out of the station in a daze and walked forward in a daze. Only when the person in charge of receiving him greeted him, did he manage to regain his senses. Hello, Director Yuan. I'm Xiao Su from the police department. At the exit, a tall and straight young man wearing gold-rimmed glasses smiled warmly and respectfully reached out his hands to shake hands with Yuan Lin. Yuan Lin came back to his senses and took a deep breath. His tone was inexplicably low. Let's go. Xiao Su nodded and took the luggage from Yuan Lin's hands. She said softly, "The car is in the underground car park." Yuan Lin grunted in acknowledgement and followed little Su down the elevator. The underground car park was also huge and clean with soft lights. There were not many cars parked inside, but it made Yuan Lin a little dazed again. As far as the eye could see, the sparse cars parked in various positions were basically all less than 300,000 yuan. 300,000 yuan was considered a small amount, and there were no less than 500,000 yuan. Yuan Lin looked at the Hyundai in front of Xiao Su. No matter how he looked at it, it felt shabby. This was Xianyuan City. This was Xianyuan City? Yuan Lin blinked his eyes. Everything was like a dream. He sat in the back of the car in silence. The sense of superiority in his heart had disappeared without a trace. The black Hyundai slowly left the car park, out of the station, and drove into the wide streets of Xianyuan City. Yuan Lin quietly looked at everything outside the window. Exquisite buildings, huge spacing, and sufficient greenery. The willfulness of Xianyuan City could be seen everywhere. No country could make such an extravagant urban planning. This was almost not a city, but a luxurious and exquisite huge garden. With such an exaggerated design style, how many people could this city accommodate after it was built? He had seen the urban planning submitted by the Xianyuan City Hall in the cabinet. The new Xianyuan City was about 6,500 square kilometers. Such a city area was not large. Compared with Yuzhou, which was 17,000 square kilometers, the area of Xianyuan City was only a little more than one-third of Yuzhou. But Yuzhou had a population of more than 20 million. What about Xianyuan City? Yuan Lin was not an expert in this area. He could only make a rough judgment. Such a city plan could accommodate at most hundreds of thousands of people. Using more than one-third of Yuzhou to accommodate hundreds of thousands of people. And it was not hundreds of thousands of people. 300,000 yuan. For 100,000 yuan? What did it mean? Yuan Lin took a deep breath and said in a low voice, "The development of Xianyuan City is really good." Yes, that's for sure. Only 1/5 of Xianyuan City has been completed. There are 5 districts in Xianyuan City, which are named simply North, South, East, West, and the city center. Now most of the places in the city have basically been demolished. Working day and night, the entire Xianyuan City is basically a construction site. We are now in the North District, where the construction has just started. However, the reconstruction of the city center has been completed. Only after going there and taking a look will you know how exaggerated it is. If this goes on, when Xianyuan City is completed, the entire city can almost be said to be a luxury. Hearing this, Xiaosu smiled and said, "But that's the future, Yuan Hall. Everything that you can see now is equivalent to 1/5 of Xianyuan City." Only after a while, Yuan Lin whispered to himself, "Where does the money come from?" "That's what our team leader wants to know." Little Su shrugged. Yuan Lin did not speak anymore. He seemed to be trying to figure out the source of the money of Emperor Dong's palace. He was Chen Fangqing's secretary. Chen Fangqing was the prime minister, and the main person in charge of the financial department of Zhongzhou State must be his confidant. Zhongzhou State still attached great importance to the construction of Xianyuan City. In the past 2 years, there had been 3 appropriations, totaling nearly 40 billion yuan. But this number was obviously not enough to build a city with almost nothing. Judging from the current situation, it was not nothing at all, but Emperor Dong's palace didn't want anything at all, and even spent money to demolish and rebuild the original foundation. 40 billion yuan was not even enough for the most basic construction. Plus the interests of the 5 Eastern European countries, and the investment of the wealthy families, Yuan Lin did not think that Emperor Dong's palace could build such a city that could be described as a luxury. The black Hyundai drove into the city center in silence. Yuan Lin watched quietly, and his heart became more and more numb. Exquisite buildings, huge statues, gorgeous street lights, lush greenery, a grand square. The Hyundai drove all the way and finally entered a small forest. Well, a small forest in the city center. The corner of Yuan Lin's mouth twitched as if he was stimulated. The forest in the city center. He felt that the city center and the forest could not be connected at all. No matter how small this small forest was, it could be used to build at least a large residential area, a business circle, or there were too many choices. But Emperor Dong's palace willfully built here, or rather, preserved a forest. All the buildings around seemed to adapt to the style of this forest, and it did not look out of place as a whole. Yuan Lin raised his head stiffly. The road in front of him slowly went up along a not obvious slope. At the highest point at the end of his sight was a pure white building like a castle. In a verdant forest, the castle was looming, with an indescribable pure beauty. The corner of Yuan Lin's mouth twitched. He wanted to say something, but he swallowed it back. He had made up his mind to complain about Emperor Dong's palace when he returned to Yuzhou. This city was luxurious and beautiful beyond Yuan Lin's imagination. But all of this meant nothing in his eyes. This was completely the capriciousness of the rich. To be exact, it was a reckless waste of resources. Hyundai kept going up. The pure white castle in front of him was getting closer and closer. Yuan Lin opened his mouth little by little. He watched the castle getting higher and higher. The soft sound faintly echoed in the forest. His eyes widened. He was dumbfounded. He was really dumbfounded. This forest might be a hill preserved by Emperor Dong's palace. But the problem was that this pure white castle was not on the top of the mountain at all. It was a huge, exquisite, and luxurious castle. A castle floating in the air. It was really a castle in the air. It floated about 20 or 30 meters high in the air, gently rotating at an imperceptible speed. The doorman trotted over and opened the door respectfully. Yuan Lin got out of the car and looked up, dumbfounded. From his point of view, he could see the huge base of the floating castle. The pure white base was engraved with countless patterns, forming a pattern of a clock. It was dusk, and night was approaching. The base of the castle was shining with gorgeous light, illuminating the whole top of the mountain dreamily. What was this? What the hell was this? Damn it. What was this? City in the Sky, the most high-end club in Tiannan. Su's tone was a little complicated. This is an industry belonging to Emperor Dong's palace, and Xianyuan City is the first one. According to their plan, in the next 1 or 2 years, branches of City in the Sky will be established in every first-tier and second-tier city in Zhongzhou State. The initial plan is to establish more than 50 similar clubs. Yuan Lin swallowed hard and murmured, "How did they do it?" "The power of money and privilege." Little Su chuckled. Yuan Lin watched this scene quietly. In a daze, he did not notice a black Passat slowly parking in the parking space near him. The doorman nearby wanted to run over and open the door. In the driver's seat, Daybreak waved his hand. He turned off the car, but did not get out. Instead, he looked at Yuan Lin not far away. "The chief secretary of the cabinet?" Daybreak raised his eyebrows and laughed. "Why does he look like a bumpkin? Is he scared out of his wits? No, he doesn't know how to get up, does he? Does he want to fly up there? He must want to fly up. When did you become so mean?" Li Guangde glanced at him with a smile. Daybreak laughed and asked, "Your Highness, are you here to see him today?" Li Guangde leaned against the back of the chair and narrowed his eyes. "Maybe, but he's not the one who asked me out." You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Sword of Destiny YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.